Turn off your lights. Make sure your doors and windows are locked. Things are about to get spooky. I like to split open my tea bags to make my brew so I can read the leaves after. I know, it's weird. You wouldn't believe the amount of bits of insects that are in there. Was being tailed by someone. By I Hate Love 776. So I work the swing shift at a mill, 5 p.m. to 1:30 a.m. And it's a 30-minute drive home, so I get home fairly late. As I'm driving home, I decide I'm going to call my cousin just to wake him up. We do this to each other. He's on rotary shift, so he will call me at all hours, and for the record, he started it. So I pulled into the parking ride kind of thing at the country line and reached into my back seat to grab my cell phone. I keep it in a bag sometimes. As I get situated and ready to call him, I notice the sedan with its brights on pull in and proceed to park right behind me. This was an empty lot at this time of night, and there was no reason they needed to be right behind me. I'm not one who gets easily rattled, but I had a really bad gut feeling. So I put my pickup in drive over to the parking curb, and head towards home. About 20 seconds after I turn onto the highway, I see the same car following me. At this point, I wasn't sure if they were following me or not, but I did not want to lead them where my house is. So I took a side road. I'm looking at the rear view. Sure enough, they make the same turn. Whatever, I think. Must be a coincidence. I take a right onto the dirt road and then turned around. As I turn around, I see the sedan at the start of the dirt road, sitting there. I thought, this is where I die. I do carry a firearm, but I never ever want to have to use it. It's obviously strictly for protecting myself and my loved ones, and I obviously want to avoid any situation I'd ever have to use it. It was there if I needed it. I decide I'm going to go four-wheel drive towards the car, and then dip into the ditch and back onto the main road behind him. So I did that, and decided to go back to where this all started, the parking ride. The reason why is because I didn't want to lead them home, so I drove back really fast, making sure the driver didn't see the turns I made beyond any of that. I parked off to the side of the road across from that lot. I waited a few minutes. There's a sharp corner past the lot that I drive every day to go home, so I was hoping if they were following me, they'd be driving fast to try to catch me. Sure enough, I see the little sedan driving very, very fast around the corner and onto the straight stretch. All my lights were off and my truck is dark gray, so I wasn't spotted. I wait until he gets further down the road and I turn my lights on and turn back to head home. In my rear view, way down the straight stretch, I see brake lights, and him turning the car around. I decide to start driving slowly after I see where I turn to get to the dirt road. I turned off my lights again and see the headlights and then realize, yep, little sedan. And they turn back onto the road that leads to the dirt road. I don't know what it was or why I'm still frightened. I guess they may have been trying to reach me about my truck's extended warranty, but I highly doubt it. After the locals' repeated complaints of flooding and water poisoning, the lake was finally drained. What surprised them the most was not the lake's depth, radioactivity, or its concealment of an underwater cave, but the sheer amount of human corpses that it left behind. Creeper in the pool. by Amanda, narrated by As the Raven Dreams.
Back when I was 14, my family and I went on a summer vacation down south. My aunt lived that way and we hadn't seen her for a few years, so my mom decided that we would all drive that way and stay with her. Of course, this was a long drive, and it was them plus the three of us kids. So, they decided to split the drive up into 2 or 3 days, instead of just going straight the whole way. I was pretty excited because this meant that we would be staying in a hotel. Staying in a hotel meant that I would get to go swimming in a swimming pool. This may not sound like anything exciting to other people, but where I live, there were no public pools. And I got to go swimming maybe once or twice a year, and I honestly loved swimming. We get out on the road for what feels like forever, not stopping because my dad was a stickler for making the most out of the time on the road. And when we get to the hotel that we were staying at, I was obviously psyched. It was way nicer than I expected it to be, and on the way to the elevator, I saw the pool. It was decent sized, and it had what looked like a small hot tub off to the side. I was just super excited to get out of the room and get into the pool, and we hadn't even gotten to our floor yet. As soon as we got to our room, which were adjoining rooms with the in-between doors, I threw my bag on the floor and immediately grabbed my bathing suit, and then went over and asked my mom and dad if I could head down to the pool. At first, my dad told me that I needed to wait for him to go down there with me, but my mom basically told my dad to just let me go and enjoy it, and then they could head down a few minutes after. My dad seemed like he really didn't want that, but my mom could tell that I really wanted to go. She said that I could go, so long as I took my 2 siblings with me and didn't do anything too crazy until they got down there. And I agreed, and I said that I would be as careful as I could until they got down. I ran down the stairs and made my way to the pool as quickly as I could, with my 2 brothers lagging behind me. They hadn't even changed yet, so when we got down to the pool, they had to run into the restrooms to get changed, and I immediately jumped into the pool. After I jumped in, I noticed that I wasn't alone in the room, and there was an employee that was cleaning up the area. As soon as I had jumped in, he turned around to look at me and he said, "Hey, no jumping in the pool." And I apologized. As soon as he heard me, and then saw me, he walked over to the pool and asked where my parents were. I told them that they were on their way down and that I had just beat them here, thinking that he was going to tell me that I couldn't be in the pool without an adult. As soon as I said this, he squatted down by the edge of the pool and was just sitting there staring at me. I had no idea what was going on, but I figured that he may have caught on that my statement was a lie. He repeated what I said to me, but it was like in a tone that was really creepy. Like, "Huh, your parents are on their way down, huh? You sure about that, cutie?" I just kind of stood there and said, "Yeah, they're on their way." He then smirked and asked me how old I was. I responded with 14, which was true. And he just kind of laughed and stood back up. And then he made a comment that was truly freaky. He just shook his head and said, "I bet I could get you out of that pool and into my car before anyone even noticed what had happened to you." I just sat there and stared at him as he turned to walk away and went back to cleaning the window, as if he hadn't literally just told me that he could kidnap me without issue. After a few moments of just sitting there, my 2 brothers ran into the room and jumped in beside me. And once again, the man turned to say, "Hey, no jumping in the pool." They both apologized to him and then went on with swimming. I wasn't really feeling much like swimming at that point, so I just sat in the water watching the man as he finished cleaning the glass. As he turned to leave, he made sure to make eye contact with me, and then winked, saying, "I'll see you later." I just remember his tone, and the way he smirked at me. It was legitimately creepy. Thankfully, I didn't see this guy the rest of the time that we were there, since we were only there for the night, and we left pretty early in the morning. I never mentioned it to my parents, or told anyone about this because I seriously didn't think anyone would do anything. Now I know that I should have reported it to them, or to someone that worked there, but at the time I just didn't know what to say about it. To be completely honest, this whole situation was enough to make me never want to go swimming at a hotel ever again.
Do you have any last words before I kill you?
Snarled the demon. That was 33 years ago, and I have not said a word since, yet it still shadows me, waiting. Girl in the Bar by General. I had a long day at work Friday, so I needed to relax, so I went to my favorite bar. I was chilling and drinking a beer when I saw her and her girlfriend come in. I noticed her looking at me and I thought, great, here it goes. I moved seats to talk to my buddies when one got up to play pool, and then bam, she sat down right next to me and we started talking. I tried to tell her I don't want company when she puts her hand on my leg. Look, I just came here to relax, so if I get you a drink, will you go away? Is what I said to her. And then all at once, her girlfriend busts between us and starts informing me that that's my girl. She said, ugh. Drama, I didn't need it, so I just excused myself and left. So the girl and her girlfriend, let's not meet again. Cheating is unforgivable, I sobbed, pressing the knife deep into my boyfriend's throat. That's why my husband must never know. Why Are You Mad I'm Not Drinking? By Serenity Angel 1990. Okay, so I'm not conventionally pretty nor classically pretty. I'm the Duffy in any friend group I'm in. I never worried about being hit on, disrespected, or kidnapped. I never had to worry about my own safety when going out, as I was never the one anyone wanted to get to know or be around, because I'm so plain, and it's always me that has to be on the lookout for my friends, male or female alike. Now, I like to go to a local bar almost daily. I don't drink alcohol there, I just get a normal Coke and wait for my ride home. It's my usual hangout spot after work, so I just sit and chill and mind my own business. Well, a few weeks ago, I had just gotten off work and was chilling at my usual spot, sipping on my drink while working on a new pendant I was making. I started wire wrapping crystals into jewelry. I didn't think anyone would try to talk to me since I basically blend into the walls, even though the staff know me and pay me slight attention and are nice to me. But this weird guy I'd never seen before came over and sat at my table across from me. I was surprised and looked up at him and struck up a small conversation that I can't even remember how I started. But he started to ask me a few questions about myself that I thought were normal and all flowed together, so I didn't think much of it. Again, I'm plain and didn't think anyone would want to do anything to me. I had drank 3 glasses of soda by then and had to use the restroom, so I grabbed my phone and purse and went into the bathroom. I may not have been worried about being abducted, but I did worry about my identity, cash, and contacts. I went back a few minutes later and went back to working since none of my stuff had been touched. I called the waitress over and asked her for a new drink, and she nodded, as it had always been ingrained in me that you never leave your drink unattended. And if you do, have it remade or leave it to the bartender. As she was going to grab my old drink, which only had a few sips taken out of it, the guy got a bit huffy at me, saying I was being wasteful for just ordering a new drink. I looked at him with a raised eyebrow in confusion. I asked him why was it his business if I did. It was my money, after all, and the refills were free. He then said I was making more work for the waitress for no reason. This annoyed me, and I told him again that it was my business and that if he didn't like it, he could always leave. He then tried to wave the waitress off without letting her change my drink, but I'd had enough of his nonsense and told him flat out, "Then you drink it if you think it's such a waste." It seemed to have caught him off guard, and he looked at me shocked, then a bit angry before leaving. I then looked at the drink and handed it to the waitress and told her that something didn't feel right about the guy that I was talking to, and if she could tell the bartender to keep an eye on him and dump out my drink and just bring me a water from then on. I left for home after being picked up shortly after and found out the next day after work that he had been arrested for assault. I didn't find out till today what exactly happened. Apparently he had gotten into a fight with a bartender working that night. The bartender had caught him putting something into a girl's drink when she wasn't looking, and he stopped her from drinking it. The guy got mad and it started a whole fight. The cops were called, and now he's awaiting trial. Apparently, he was trying to see if he can get someone like me, who always has her guard down for herself, because my confidence was low. He thought I'd be easy mark with just a little attention. But when I didn't just drink my drink when I came back, he had to try on another girl. If he really was targeting me, I have to question his sanity and sobriety. Thank goodness for those old lessons about safety growing up. Thanks, Mom and Dad. And to the guy at the bar, let's not meet again. I grabbed the biggest knife I could, ready to put an end to Dad's constant abuse of me and Mom. As I turned around, I saw him push Mom, and I collapsed under her weight, her blood cold as it ran down my fingers. Robbery by C.L. Narrated by As the Raven Dreams.
I have a story that was seriously the most terrifying thing to ever happen to me. I used to work the closing shift of a pizza place. I was a delivery driver, and they closed at midnight. The drivers were expected to help clean up the restaurant at close, so I would usually get out around 1 or so. After work, I would always go to this little gas station / convenience store that was open 24 hours, and most of the times that I went, the front counter was being worked by a guy named Dan. Dan was a 50-something-year-old man that really didn't seem to have much going for him. But he was friendly enough, and I was able to have a decent conversation with him each time that I would visit. The thing about this convenience store, they only had one person working each overnight shift from the hours of midnight to around 5 in the morning. Obviously, this wasn't ideal, and was a huge security risk for the store, and that person in general. Because of this, and because they expected to get a bit more foot traffic this summer, they had installed what was basically a buzzer system. After 10 p.m., the cashier had to hit the button to unlock the front door for the person that was outside, and this seemed like it was safe enough. Basically, Dan could decide if he wanted to let someone in the store or not. though he was told to let everyone in that wasn't wearing your stereotypical robber attire. On the night that this event happened, I worked a bit later than normal because we were really busy at the store. So we had a lot of dishes that we needed to do. Because it was almost 2 in the morning, I decided that I would go get some caffeine and then head home to play a game for a few hours. My sleep schedule was already screwed up, so I figured why not just pull an all-nighter. I pulled up to the store. Dan saw me and waved me in before hitting the buzzer. I walked in and asked him how he was doing, just making small talk and asking about the night. He told me that I was late, and I told him how busy the restaurant was. Basically, we just made some really banter-filled small talk about nothing in particular. After a few minutes, I saw a man walk toward the counter from around where the drink freezer was, and I told Dan that I would let him get back to work while I went to get my monster. The man that approached the counter, he looked a bit raggedy. I'm not trying to be insulting. He just kind of looked like he may have been homeless. He was wearing a large jacket in the middle of July, and was also wearing a ski cap on top of his head. Being the summer, I could only imagine that he was incredibly uncomfortable in the heat. I turned to walk away from the counter to get my drink, when I heard Dan say, just the water this evening?" And then the man started screaming something at him. I turned around to see what the hell was going on, and I realized what he was yelling. The homeless-looking guy was yelling, "Give me the money," and pointing a gun straight at Dan's head. As soon as he realized that I was looking at him, he pointed the gun at me and told me to get behind the counter. I put my hands up and complied, walking back behind the counter and standing with my back to the wall. He keeps yelling at Dan to give him the money, or else he would just kill us both. Dan was scrambling and struggling to open the register. I think the nerves were beating the crap out of him, and for some reason he couldn't think about what buttons to press to get it open. The whole time he's scrambling to press the buttons, this guy is pushing the gun into his forehead and screaming that he had 5 seconds before he pulled the trigger. Dan pushed the button and put his hands up, and then the register shot open. The man grabbed all the cash from the drawer and immediately took off towards the front door. He went to push it open, but of course it wouldn't open because it had to be buzzed. After a couple of seconds of him trying to get it open, he stepped back and shot the door several times, causing the glass to shatter, and then he booked it. Thankfully, while fumbling over the register, Dan had pressed the button on the register to set off the silent alarm. A few minutes after the man had taken off, the police pulled up with their guns drawn, and they ran into the store. We told the officers about the man, and told them which way he had went. One of the officers got back in the car and started driving around the block to find the guy. The officers took statements from both of us and asked to watch the camera footage so they could get a visual of the perp. They did the whole thing they normally did, dusted for prints, got the footage, and then took our information so that they could call us if necessary. Obviously, I was panicking inside, and Dan was freaking out. He called the owner and told him that he needed to come out and figure out what to do about the door, and then when he got off the phone with him, he told me to go get my drink and get the hell out of there. I went and got my energy drink, though I'm pretty sure I could have just stayed awake on pure adrenaline, and when I went to pay for it, he told me that it was on him that night. I just kind of nodded and left. After all this was said and done, I actually found out that this wasn't the guy's first robbery. It wasn't even his first robbery that night. Apparently, the little convenience store was actually the third spot that he had hit that evening. The first store he robbed was a grocery store on the other side of the state line, and the second was another gas station that was about 20 minutes north of us. The thing is, at the other gas station, he had actually shot the clerk because he wouldn't cooperate. The guy wasn't killed because he shot him in the shoulder, but he was obviously injured pretty badly. And he wasn't actually homeless. He was only using that as a disguise to make himself look larger than he was, and harder to identify. Since he had hit 2 other places that night, the police were actually pretty heavy out on the streets, which is why they were quick to get there. And they actually caught the guy a few blocks up the road where he was getting into his getaway car. It was seriously terrifying to be a bystander in this robbery, and considering he had shot the other clerk, I can imagine that if Dan had any more trouble with the register, he likely would have shot him too. It scares the hell out of me to consider how close our lives came to their end, but I am thankful that it ended without casualties. After this happened, the store decided that they would just close for the overnight shift for a while, and I decided that after work, I would just go straight home. It could have been much, much worse for sure, but it was still the scariest thing that has ever happened to me.
I could only watch from my hiding spot in horror as the hideous beast beat, tortured, and mutilated my friends with what I could only assume was delight. If I had taken the ancient tales about the human's bloodlust and viciousness more seriously, I never would have suggested hunting in the suburbs beyond the safety of the woods. The Regular by Rain. Back when I worked at a local pizza place that had a really busy dining room, I would get some real characters coming in to get food. For the most part, the characters were just pervy old guys that would make compliments about my body, and I would make a point to tell them that that behavior was not appreciated. And for the most part, they would be quiet, but sometimes you would get the old guy that would make compliments about learning to take a compliment, or whatever BS like that. Fun fact with those situations, ask them if they would say what they said to you to their own mother, or if they'd be okay if some random guy said it to their daughter. It sometimes works against them, and they kinda get the hint. That's not relevant to my story, but it's still good information to have out there. The story I wanted to mention was about a customer that used to come in frequently named Tommy. Tommy was in his late 40s, overweight, balding, and could use a shower. But honestly, he was a pretty nice guy, so I never had much of an issue serving him. He was surprisingly a good conversationalist, and he and I would talk about a lot of things that most people wouldn't bring up with their waitress. Nothing weird or creepy, just some neat conspiracy things and some technology talk. The other thing I liked about Tommy was that he made it a point to never flirt with me or even say anything considered inappropriate to or about me. He was very respectful of me as a person, and I would say that I considered him a friend. That all kind of fell apart when the conversation happened that I would personally consider creepy. Some people may hear this and think it's not creepy, but to me, coming from him, it was actually pretty messed up. He came in one day and everything seemed to be going as normal. We were slower than normally would have been, so I had a few moments to pause and talk to him about some random things. And I, at some point, mentioned that I was moving soon. I was actually about to move in with my boyfriend because he had proposed to me. But he mistook what I was saying as I was just looking for a new place to live. He immediately looked me up and down and said, "Do you want to live in my basement?" I kinda paused for a moment and looked at him and then said, "Live in your basement? Are you subletting your house or something?" I wasn't interested in living there. It was just a weird thing to say. He immediately followed up with, "Oh, no, but I could put a bed down there and then you and I could be together." You wouldn't have to work anymore. You could just stay in my basement, with me. I was honestly taken aback to the point that I think I chuckled at this suggestion, thinking he was making an off-kilter joke or something. But I realized after a moment that he was being serious. I asked him why he would just ask someone to move into his basement like that, especially if he wasn't subletting. He then told me that it would be perfect for me because we could always be close. I never thought I'd have to say it, but I told him I was engaged and that I never saw him in that way. I think he was devastated by my comment because he just kind of looked at the floor and stared, and he didn't seem to want to talk to me after that. In fact, he actually never came back to the restaurant, though he did send love letters to me about 3 months after this. Now, this in of itself is a bit creepy, but it actually does get worse. Around 2 years after all that happened, 2 years after the last time I seen Tommy, and around 7 months after I had quit my job at that pizza place, I was watching the news and saw a story about someone being arrested. And who else's picture shows up on the screen but Tommy? Come to find out, Tommy lived with his mother, and his mother was completely disabled and depended upon him to do everything for her. From what I gathered from the story, Tommy's mother died from neglect. Basically, she starved to death because he wasn't taking care of her like he was supposed to. Apparently, when they found her, she had been deceased for a while, and Tommy was still living in the house, in the basement. The photos they showed of the house were nothing shy of a scene from Hoarders. There were small patches of rooms that were empty, but for the most part, the entire house was disgusting. There was trash everywhere. The walls were yellowed, and it was pretty clear they had animals. As they were showing pictures of the house, I saw pizza boxes from where I worked in the bathrooms. That's how bad it was. He was arrested and charged for his mother's death. I believe negligent homicide is the term they used. And that's my story of the time that I was invited to live in the basement by a guy that I thought was cool, but apparently lived with and was negligently caretaking for his mother. Not that there's anything wrong taking care of your loved ones, but Tommy was pretty obviously not a good caretaker. I feel terrible for his mother, and I hope she's resting in peace, but I really don't feel bad for Tommy, and I'm thankful that I never met him again. A blind man has the ability to see ghosts of those who have recently passed away for a short time. I just wanted to see her face, he told the judge when she asked him why he murdered his own daughter. I know there's really nothing to be afraid of in the 3 seconds of running in the pitch black from the light switch to my bed. But I've been running for 8 minutes now.
This story was created by user Pedantic Seal. The title is The Time I Believe I Could Have Been Kidnapped. Narrated by Silver, Underworld's Scary Stories. This happened to me and my friend Nick about 2 months ago. Now, I like to start off to say that I'm non-binary, assigned female at birth, and he is a trans man. Neither of us pass, and we're both under 5'3". I'm 19 and he's 18. We like to meet up at this cupcake and coffee place, usually around late afternoon or early evening. That day was the latter. We have our cupcakes and tea, and by the time we leave the cafe, the sun has gone down. Good time to go home, right? Well, we have this tradition. You see, this cafe was in a strip mall, and it had big lots. Our tradition was that we each buy one cursed item from said big lots. We bought a carton of Whoopers and a tub of cheese balls. Earlier we had discussed that I would walk him part of the way home, as he told me that he had a random drunk try and grab him when he was jogging earlier that week in the area that we had to walk through. By the time we left, it was already dark out. As we were walking to the school that is different from the cafe and Nick's house, it came up in conversation that we didn't have anything to protect ourselves. I didn't even have my pocket knife with me, but no worries. Nothing was going to happen. Right? Wrong. We were almost at the school, had just crossed the first street, need to get there in fact, when we heard a car approaching the intersection. We turned to see the car is a white pickup truck. Both of us immediately got a bad vibe. The car starts to slow down too soon and approaches the intersection too slowly, which is unusual, as most of the time cars just sped through. The entire time the guy is watching us. Instead of going through, he pulls over to the lane closer to us and stops, continuing to watch us. He's about 10 feet away, close enough that we can see his face. He was a middle-aged man, but we couldn't see how big he was. We could see that he was grinning. Then we saw someone shuffling in the back of the car, but it was too dark to see what the other guy looked like. The guy's grin flattered when he noticed us staring back at him. Nick is in a fighting stance, ready to bash whoever comes out of the car with a carton of Whoppers, and I'm behind him, looking over his shoulder, clutching my carton of cheese balls. I don't know what made this dude leave, but after what felt like a solid minute, he drove off. We didn't look away from the car until he was completely out of sight. Both of us walked away from the encounter, feeling like we narrowly escaped from something horrible. Now, I am now hearing this secondhand may not seem scary, but it was to me, and it had a lasting effect. Now, I don't go anywhere without pepper spray and a pocket knife.
Using an ancient magical book, I learned how to teleport. As I was immediately transported into a plane of non-existence, the last thing I saw was a line of red text on the very corner of my vision. Banned for hacking. Duration: forever. A foreign man tried to buy me. By Anonymous. Throwaway account because I don't want my coworkers to accidentally stumble upon this story and somehow be able to identify me. Some information about myself. I'm a trans guy. I was born a female and have been physically transitioning to a male over the last 6 years, using testosterone. I am 100% passing these days. I'm completely stealthy at work. None of the guys have any idea that I was a fab. Edit. A commenter asked what the paragraph above has to do with the story, and I'm really glad they did. It's important for me to be able to introduce myself when talking about the stories from my past, so that I can tell them in current voice and not the one I used to have. Anyways, my story takes place when I was 15 years old. A lot of people would have considered the 15-year-old me conventionally very pretty. I had long, dark brown, straight hair, freckles, tan skin, and bright blue eyes. This day, my mom and I were in Dillard's looking for a particular type of shirt I needed for school. Lucky me, I went to a public school that required uniforms, and our school's colors were very common. So a lot of the more affordable stores had been picked clean. I would consider Dillard's to attract a certain kind of customer most of the time. Mostly little old ladies that smell like powder. But I guess creeps can be anywhere. My mom and I were going from rack to rack trying to find school shirts when I noticed a man nearby. I glanced up at him and he was staring at me, smiling. He was probably in his late 30s, very tan with shiny black hair. I looked away and continued searching for clothes. I guess my mom had noticed him too because I could feel that she was tense standing next to me. We calmly walked to a rack further away to see if he would follow, and he did. He kept a little distance, but his eyes stayed locked on me and he continued smiling. He must have watched and followed us for at least 20 minutes. My mom tested him again, and we moved to another rack once more. He followed. This time he came up directly to us and spoke to my mom. "Is this your daughter?" My mom coldly told him yes. "She is very beautiful, a princess." Mom gave him a sharp "thank you" and went to pull me away. He reached for me and shouted, "I would like to buy her. I would like to buy your gorgeous daughter. I will take her with me and give her everything she ever wanted." All the while still trying to grab my arm. I kept stepping backwards, but he continued advancing towards me, staring into my eyes, still talking about making me a princess at his palace. It all happened so fast. Suddenly, Mama Bear mode kicked in, and like lightning, she pulled me behind her to get between me and the man. She pretty much chest bumped him backwards. Through gritted teeth, she hissed at him that if he valued his life, he would leave the store, get into his car, and drive away. He tried to protest once, but my mom roared, "Leave!" His eyes got huge and he fell into a rack of khaki pants trying to get away. We immediately left the store, and in the safety of the car, my mama broke down in tears. I don't remember even being afraid while everything was happening. I was ready to put up a fight of my life, but looking at the tears on my mom's face made me realize exactly how dangerous that situation was. "There are cameras everywhere, so you'll never get away with this," the innocent man said as I aimed my pistol at him. I pointed to my badge, and we both knew I would.
Uncomfortable Encounter with a Man as a Child. Written by Riley 14141414.
Narrated by the Night's End Podcast.
I was 12 when this happened. My grandma, her best friend, the best friend's two granddaughters, ages 3 and 16, and I went to dinner at the local Mexican restaurant. When we walked in, they sat us down at a bigger table. Across from where I was sitting, there was a 50-ish-year-old man sitting alone at a booth with his sunglasses on. He had a ponytail, a jacket, a t-shirt on, jeans, and he had a big backpack next to him. The table directly beside me was a boy, 12 also, I knew from school. His 2 foster dads and 2 foster sisters, like ages 2 and 3. The older man across from me saw that I was wearing a Nirvana shirt and complimented it. I didn't think anything of it. I just smiled and said thank you. The way the shirt had it, the Nirvana phrase, was placed on my chest area, but I was 12. Didn't even think anything of it. The older man started talking to my friend from school's foster dads. He then asked if he could hold one of the little girls. This is where I started to pay more attention. He held and played with the little girl for a while. I could tell the foster dads were uncomfortable, but were trying to be nice. The old man went back to his table and just sat there. He kept staring at me, and at this point sirens were going off in my head. I was already uncomfortable and I could feel his stare. Mind you, he wore sunglasses the whole time. He never took them off. He just kept staring at me. I told my grandma I was uncomfortable and she said just to ignore it. The old man got up and held the little girl again, but without asking this time. He was playing with her and holding her and being really unsettling. The foster dads asked him if he could please put her down, and the older man hesitated, then put her down. He went and sat back down at his table. He continued to stare at me. He looked at me and said, "I really, really like your shirt." This is when I was ready to go. Our food had just arrived and I didn't touch a single bit. My stomach was in knots. I'd never ever felt this way before. I had to go to the bathroom, but where the bathroom was, it's a secluded area where no one could see you. I immediately knew in my gut that if I got up to go, the older man would follow me. Again, it's a secluded area in a one-person bathroom. I was ready to throw up, I was so scared. I told my grandma that I had to pee, but was scared the man would follow me and hurt me. My grandma's best friend's granddaughter was getting off vibes from him the whole time. She took a picture of him in case he did anything. We told the waiter we were ready to go and asked for the check. We went to get up and the man tried to talk to me, and the best friend's granddaughter said, "Leave her alone." When we got to the counter, my grandma told the owner that the older man was being really creepy and it made me feel really uncomfortable. The owner apologized and said he would take care of it. We left and dropped everyone off. It was just me and my grandma driving when I saw him walking on the side of the road. I told my grandma, and she said he probably got kicked out. I went home and told my mum how he made me feel, and she told me to always trust my gut. I told my dad and he said, "Well, what do you want me to do about it? It's over." My father is a whole story for another time. I took the Nirvana shirt off and never wore it again. I went to school the next day and asked my friend who was at the table next to me what happened after I left. He said the guy tried to hold his little sister again, and they kicked him out. I'm so thankful I trusted my gut. I know he would have done something. Thank God I've never seen the man again.
As the electricity flows into the heater, I feel warmth in my hands for the first time in weeks. So, big shout out to all my patrons for tonight, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
Hello everyone, Grimm here, and today I'm going to be reading a story by the name of Please Don't Wave at Strangers, written by the user Wrong Definition 465. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy. I went to the library yesterday to drop off some books that were due. But when I drove up to the outdoor book return, the chute wouldn't open. I figured I must not have known how to open it, so I decided to go inside and return them. As I was walking towards the door, I noticed a man with earbuds sitting on a bench near the entrance. I thought nothing of it and kept walking, but when I got to the door, I found that it was locked. I was surprised because I didn't think the library would be closed yet. I knew they were supposed to be closed for Labor Day, but I didn't think it would be yesterday. There were cars parked outside too. I shrugged it off and walked back to my car, which was parked a few meters away. I didn't look behind me, but as I was walking back, I heard the man singing loudly to himself. It sounded more like he was yelling. He was saying, "Goa, Goa, Goa." I thought it was a little bit weird and wondered if he was directing it at me because I was leaving, but I just ignored it. I've never heard anyone sing to themselves in public like that, so it creeped me out a little, but not enough to raise red flags. As soon as I got back to the car, the man started waving at me to come over. I froze for a moment because I wondered what he needed. I was the only one in the parking lot, so I was sure he wasn't beckoning to anyone else. But then I remembered a warning my father had given me not to come over when a stranger beckons me. He specifically told me that because of this one encounter I had at a park that was similar. That's another story. Either way, I found it odd, so I locked my doors and drove away. He kept staring at my car as I left. I felt guilty because I didn't want to seem rude or stuck up, but I didn't know what his intentions were. I gave it some thought later and figured he might have just wanted to tell me that the library was closed, but if he had wanted to tell me, he could have told me when I was at the door. There was no reason for him to beckon me over after I had just gotten into my car. I honestly don't know what to make of it. I think I may have overreacted a little. I suppose I could have driven up to the curb and lowered my window, but I didn't like the idea of that either. It could have been completely harmless and I misjudged, but I can't tell for sure. I didn't mean to be rude, I just drove away because the situation creeped me out. Final edit. The title is a little misleading. A fairer way to say would be, please don't beckon at strangers.
"20 minutes after the scheduled drop-off, she stifled her anxiety and called the school to ask why her son's bus was running so late. The woman on the other end sounded more panicked than she felt when she said, "Is this another inquiry about bus 203? I promise we're working with the police and doing everything we can to find where they went." Creepy guy hiding in the garden. By Minimum Switch. So this happened to me when I was 11 or 12 years old, over a decade ago, and I still remember it vividly. At the time, I lived in a semi-detached house with my mom, dad, and siblings. It was a decent size, but the most impressive part was the garden, which essentially had 3 levels. The first level was concrete, the second was grass, and the third, also grass, also had my trampoline on it. At the very end of the garden was a tree embankment. The area I lived in was somewhat hilly. One morning I woke up to a cracking sound like a snapping branch, and I was worried since a week earlier a tree from the embankment had fallen onto our neighbor's garden. My bedroom was at the back of the house overlooking the garden, so I opened the curtains to see if another tree had fallen. Instead, I saw a guy hiding in one of the trees in the garden. He was pale with blonde hair and wearing all black clothing. He was looking directly at me, presumably because he saw the curtain move. He started smirking and moved his finger in a "come here" motion. I totally freaked out and shouted for my mom and dad to come into my room. I was so scared I physically felt like I couldn't move. This was super early in the morning, by the way, around 5 a.m., so it took my dad about 30 seconds to get into my room, at which point the stranger had hid behind the trees. I remember being really shaken up. I was crying whilst I told my dad what happened. He went out to the back garden to see if he could spot the guy, but he was gone by that point. A bit of time passed and I started to forget about it. Then about 3 months after, my mom and I were watching TV together after I finished school. The doorbell rang, my mom went to answer the door. I looked out the window of the living room where we sat and saw a white van parked outside. It was the same white van as my uncle's, so I walked out of the living room and into the hallway to say hi to him. When I got to the porch where my mom was standing, I realized it wasn't my uncle. It was the same guy I had seen in the garden a few months prior, and it really freaked me out. He noticed me as I walked behind my mom and gave me the same smirk of when he was in the garden. I wanted to say something to my mom, but I couldn't. I was freaking out inside. Anyways, he just asked my mom if she wanted some work done on the drive. She said no, and he left, got back in the van, and drove off. He didn't give her a business card or anything, and the van didn't have any company branding, and he didn't knock on any of our neighbors' doors. I told my mom that it was the same guy as soon as he went, and she started to feel uneasy about the situation too. A month or so after I got my first job doing the paper round, I had to deliver over 300 papers with my best friend at the time. It was getting towards winter and it was dark around 4:30 p.m. We'd been doing this job together for around a month. When the one evening after school it was super dark and rainy, we were about halfway through delivering the newspapers when a van started following us, driving really slow, at the same pace we were walking. We clocked that it was following us after a minute and we started to panic as I noticed it was the same guy again. We left the newspaper trolley and started to walk quite fast up the hill. We were about a 10-minute walk from my house. I rang my mom, who made me stay on the line while she left the house to meet us. She told us to go to the corner shop. From where we were, that was about a minute away. When we made it to the shop, the van sped off really fast. The police were called, who came to my house for a report. We told them everything. That was the last time I ever saw the creepy stranger, but I still remember what he looked like so vividly. I killed a rat today. And as I removed the shiv from Vinny's spleen, the shocked faces of the other inmates made it clear that no one will ever tell the guards about this gang's activities again.
This story is entitled The Balaclava Man Hanging on My Window Ledge, written by Obi-Wan Kenobi, narrated by Phoenix Fire. This happened to me when I was 9 years old, 28 years ago, but I still remember it so vividly. I lived at the time in a seaside resort called Blackpool, England, in a modest 4-bedroom house. The area itself was good with very little crime or concern. Until that night. I shared a bedroom with my brother. We had bunk beds, and I was on the top bunk. The bedroom was on the first floor at the rear of the property. My bedroom overlooked the back garden. One night, I was awoken by the sound of a window lock being tried. I opened my eyes and looked towards the bottom of the bed, which faced the 4 large windows. To my horror, someone was outside, perched on the window ledge, attempted to get in through my window. I froze in horror, not daring to allow them to see I was awake. I remember sliding back down into my bed, keeping as still as possible. I lied there for no more than a minute, but it felt like an eternity. My heart was beating that loudly, I was sure it would give me away. When my eyes closed, I stayed still listening to them shuffle across to the next window. Unlike before, I could now hear a screwdriver or something in his hand, which was being used a little more forcibly to get in. Without moving, I opened one eye ever so slightly to see whether I could make out who this person was. A security light at the back of the property suddenly triggered mid-look. I panicked. Surely now he'd see me? Now he knew I was there. Staring back at me was a dark figure, black clothes, wearing a matching balaclava, only his eyes on show. This horrible, startled, piercing look, clearly having been caught off guard by the security light. He froze and just stared. He didn't move an inch. I was now set up, equaling as stunned, staring back, locked by fear. I immediately jumped off the top of my bunk bed. There wasn't time for stairs, screaming for my parents as I ran out of the room and into theirs. They tried convincing me it was a bad dream and told me to get back into bed. There was obviously no chance of that happening, and after a couple of minutes, they agreed to go and investigate, which simply entailed looking through my bedroom window. Nobody was there. They had gone. I got back into bed, still almost frozen with fear. What if he had gotten in? He might be in the room right now. He could comfortably fit in my wardrobe, or even under the bed. My brother, who was 6 years my junior, had slept through the whole episode and was no use. Looking down my bed towards the window again, I noticed the latch on the fourth window. It had been left open inside. A simple pull from outside would have easily opened it. I shut my eyes and remember silent tears falling down my cheeks. If he was in my room and knew I was awake, he might harm me to keep me quiet. Pretending to be asleep seemed the best option. And eventually, I must have nodded off. I was woken up the next day by the sound of my cat outside screeching in the garden. Daylight came through the windows, and the bedroom didn't feel anywhere near as scary as the night before. Cautiously, I walked towards my bedroom window. I noticed marks around the window locks from the outside where the paint had been scraped. It wasn't a bad dream. My cat screeched again, and I heard a commotion outside, below me in the garden. 3 police sniffer dogs were parading around. A policeman was stood talking to my mom. I rushed outside but was quickly ushered back into the house and was told to take the cat indoors. The look on my mom's face, I knew she was trying to hide something from me. The ambulance, which arrived a short while later, gave it all away. Apparently, it turned out someone had broken into the house next door through the back bedroom windows. The motive? Well, it appeared to have been a simple theft, but the elderly lady who came across the intruder had been found dead at the bottom of her stairs. The police never found out who it was. But then again, they never dusted our windows for prints, as my story was never told. We left the house and moved away within 6 months. I still think they feel guilty for not listening to me and not acting differently. Even to this day, my parents don't wish to talk about it whenever I try and bring it up.
As they lowered my son into his grave, I took out my cell phone and looked at him one last time. It made me smile to realize the sedative hadn't worn off yet, and the casket's Wi-Fi camera was holding strong.
Halloween and Bloody Knives. Written by No Honey Medved.
Narrated by Creepy Oz.
This happened over a decade ago, but I only recently found this sub and I think it's a good fit. It was Halloween of 2008. I was in college and still in a relationship with my first serious boyfriend. We'd been together since high school, and it took this night to show me our relationship was abusive. It took one more incident before I finally left him for good. He was wonderful when sober, if intense and controlling, but when he was drunk, I learned he was truly terrifying. This was the first such incident that truly scared me. He'd joined in a dumb game, some Gatorade and Shine challenge. They'd empty a bottle of Gatorade at least halfway, fill the rest up with moonshine. The goal was to finish the bottle within an hour and then tell them crazy stories. Well, he completed the challenge, but he never did tell his friends the story. He couldn't remember most of it, and it painted him in a horrific light. I knew things were heading downhill when he started calling me a slut after saying hi to a guy friend at the party we were at. I decided that we'd better head home before he got any worse. I thought I could nip it in the bud, manage it. We get home and change out of our costumes. James wanted to have sex, but in his state, and after what he'd called me, I wasn't interested. Oddly enough, it led to him calling me a whore. I left the apartment to go smoke. Our neighbours were having a party and 2 guys were outside smoking as well. They came over to see if I was okay. I had been crying and they'd heard the yelling. I said I was, which they could obviously see was a lie. They let me know that if I needed help, they'd help me. James chose that moment to come outside. He said he'd heard us, and he told them to get away from me, stalking towards them. I stood up to get between them. They told me that they'd meant what they said and to not forget it. Then told him to watch himself. I was facing them to say bye and thanks for the offer when one of the guys gasped, staring at my boyfriend in shock. I turned around and my eyes immediately caught on the ground. Just as what I was seeing registered, the other guy lunged forward and grabbed me, pulling me behind him. What was on the ground that had elicited such a reaction, you ask? Blood. Blood was dripping on the ground from his hand. He was holding a knife so tightly that he'd sliced his own hand open. I begged him to drop it, which he only agreed to when I walked back towards him. I was an idiot, I know. The 2 guys seemed at a loss and I feel so bad for them, having their Halloween ruined by this scary, crazy bullshit. They left me to it after I swore I'd be fine, reiterating that I could come to them for help. We got inside and I immediately started hiding all the sharp objects. I called James's roommates, begging them to come home. He started screaming to give the knives back. How I was a slut and I wouldn't even have sex with him. What use was I? I called my parents and I left. I then called his mother because I was scared that he'd hurt himself. She told me that he was my problem now. I should have called the police, but I didn't want to ruin his life. I know. I'm ashamed to say that I got back together with him for 6 more months of hell after that. But today, I can safely say, James, please, let's not meet ever again.
As we got into space, going as far as we could, we found an invisible wall surrounding our solar system. A voice came out of the void. Quarantine has not been lifted in this area yet. Time of death, 8:23, called the paramedic as I lay in the back of an alley with my throat sliced open. I woke up from my nightmare to see a message from my day 8 reading. Are we still on for 8 tonight? Guy chased us home by Unhinged Woman 777. Last year I was going out for drinks with my friends, but since I had to go to uni the next day, I only stayed till around midnight. My boyfriend promised to pick me up and go home with me, because I don't like taking the subway alone at night, but since I was pretty drunk by then, it took me a little bit to walk out of the pub. Unfortunately, we had to wait for the night bus, with multiple stops, since the subway closes on the weekdays at night. For context, my boyfriend and I don't live together, but very close to each other, around a 15 to 20 minute walk distance. Both areas are pretty shitty. He lives near a train station, many crackheads, homeless, sketchy people around, and I live in a cheap, bad district with a high crime rate. My building has 2 entrances on 2 different streets because it's a corner building site leading to a patio and then to apartment building and its doors. To get into my apartment, I have to open 3 doors. I usually use the entrance door that is nearer to the subway and on the side of my apartment. We had to take 2 buses to go home. One drove us to the train station, and the next one from the train station to my apartment. After getting out of the first bus, we realized that we'd have to wait for 20 minutes or something for the second bus to come, and since I had to sleep at home, class the next day, I didn't want to stay at his place. My boyfriend didn't want to wait, so he persuaded me to walk instead of taking the bus, which sober me would have never done. But since I was still drunk and didn't care how I got home, so I agreed. So we started to walk home and passed a few sketchy people, mostly people smelling of drugs, etc. But nothing really bad. Then I saw a guy walking in our direction, and I somehow got a bad feeling, so I told my boyfriend that I wanted to change to the other side of the street because I didn't want to walk past him. Suddenly the guy yelled, "Hey!" as if he wanted to ask us something, but we ignored it and continued to walk. He got louder and louder until he started to yell. I could see from the corner of my eye that he was coming over, so I whispered, "Run," to my boyfriend, took his hand and ran the fastest I could while he was chasing us. We ran and ran and ran, and then made a turn to the right, the street where I lived, and hid. It seemed like he was gone, so I took my keys out and started running towards my building, taking the other entrance of my building that I normally don't use. As I was trying to open the door, my boyfriend started panicking, throwing me inside the patio and closing the door aggressively, and then pushing me to the building. He explained that the guy came running around the other side of the street, meaning he took a shortcut, probably thinking we were going to run to the subway/bus stop. If we had taken the other entrance, he would have clearly been the faster one. Being in shock, we unfortunately didn't call the police, which I regret. I stopped going out for drinks/clubbing for half a year after this and slept at my boyfriend's place for 2 weeks because I was scared that he would come back. I think the worst thing about this is that he really wanted to get to us for whatever reason. I still want to know why he chased us for so long. 2 weeks later, a girl a few streets away was essayed in front of her building by a guy who chased her home. I wonder if it was the same guy or just a coincidence. I never thought I'd ever want to hear anyone scream or cry in pain. But that soon changed after I realized that my car was upside down and my toddler was silent. I was kidnapped as a child by my father, by Baby Yoda Snuggles. Hi Reddit. Today I write this as a 36-year-old man. You'll have to bear with me, as the details of the story are vague and a blur, but I will share what I remember. In the summer of 1993, I was in first grade. My parents had been divorced for many years, with my mother having sole custody. As a child, I barely remember my father, but he would make his brief appearances or send gifts on Christmas or my birthdays. Seeing my father always made me happy, as I was far too young to comprehend the complexities of a battered relationship or marriage. After school one day, I was shocked to come outside and see my father waiting for me. My grandmother usually picked me up from school, but never my father. He had a small black car, a beater. He always seemed to dress nice, suspenders and slack, hair pulled back into a tight ponytail. I remember getting into his car and smelling what I now know as an adult to be clove. I later gathered that he had a habit of rolling his own cigarettes and gained that he must have been in a clove phase. There is a gap in time, and now it's nighttime, and I'm watching the fluorescent lights from miscellaneous stores fly by my passenger seat window. A gas station I can't remember, Grimm's ice cream at an intersection, and more time loss. I'm now running around with another kid in and out of yellow-lit apartment corridors. Some doors are open and we go into one. There are kids in the back bedroom playing Sega. I watch as Sonic zips through loops and listen to familiar music that momentarily makes me feel safe. I suddenly realize I'm very alone with the complete strangers and find my way back outside. Another gap. My belly is full from being burritos, and I look down a very dark hallway in my father's apartment. I'm standing next to an aquarium, giving blue ambient light that sits on my face. I want to go home. Something doesn't feel right. In an attempt to comfort me, my father gives me a toy flashlight that projects the Batman symbol. I shine it down the black hallway. The cheap plastic of the switch fidgets and stubbornly slides clicks on and off. My father is on the phone and he's upset, voice raised. I apologize for not knowing what happened next, but I can confidently say I was safely returned by my father. My mother had no idea where he lived, and we would sometimes drive around at night in an effort to find the mentioned landmarks to trigger my memory. I hadn't thought much about this until tonight, and it really made me feel wrong and uncomfortable. As you may have guessed, I do not have a relationship with him. Please stop being so loud. I need complete silence to concentrate, said the doctor, as I screamed my lungs out during my autopsy. A Child from Imagination by Anonymous. Okay, so I don't know how accurate the story will be, so here it goes. So I live in a residential area which has few people. That's why the area in which I live is not well known. So this is back when I was 10 years old, and it was a usual day, and I was sitting outside my house on the chair looking at the clouds or something. That's when I did something weird. I began to scream, "Hey!" into nothingness. I do not know what motivated me to do this, but I kept on doing this until I got a response from the other side of my house. The voice replied back saying, "Hi." And I got up from my chair and saw a girl about my age just standing there on the sidewalk looking at me. She was wearing a black dress and had straight black hair. We began yelling things back and forth across the street, which now that I think about it was pretty weird. Here's when the story gets hazy. The thing about 10-year-old me is that I was an incredibly shy and introverted person. I only spoke when I was spoken to, and otherwise, I kept to myself most of the time. But this time, it was like I was a different person. Somehow, and I don't know how, but I managed to invite this girl into my house, which I had never done before. Keep in mind, this was a girl I had never seen before, which made this even more confusing. I remember my mom also seeing her and inviting her in without any hesitation. I remember we went to my room, and I clearly remember us reading a book about ladybirds. We drew for a bit, and then she said she was going home because it was getting dark. After she left, my mom laughed and said that she was happy that I made a new friend. After that, I never saw the girl again. I went out and yelled like I did, but I never got a response. I was confused and I didn't let that bother me much. Later, when I asked my mom about it, to my horror she said, "What girl?" And I told her about the girl who lives across the street. She stared at me for a moment and said, "There is no girl your age across the street. The people who live there are a family of 3 who just had a baby." I never really thought about this story before, but ever since watching many videos on horror stories made me think about this supernatural experience. This sounds like it came straight out of a movie. What intrigues me is that, did I conjure up this girl simply out of boredom? Was she a spirit? If so, how did my mom acknowledge her and forget about her the next day? I guess there are some things that we never find out. "Come on, buddy, let's go," I said to my son after pointing out the crickets on our camping trip. "We need to keep moving," my wife mouthed as she checked the Geiger counter hidden in her jacket. Pretty sure I met a serial killer in Tampa, 2017. By Adventurous Drive 69. I was living in Tampa, Florida in 2017, right when there was a serial killer announcement. The news reported they caught the guy a few weeks later, but to this day, my gut tells me they got the wrong guy. So, here's my story. It was April 20th, 2017, so you know what I was doing, and a lot of it. But keep in mind at this point in my life, I was constantly stoned for 7 years. Weed didn't affect me in the same way. My boyfriend at the time and I agreed to start the night at different friends' houses since his friends didn't smoke and mine did. Topped with the fact that I was about to move to a different state and it would be the last time we would see my friends for a while. So around 10 to 11 p.m. I would take an Uber to get to his friend's house. The night was highly normal up to this point. So I order the Uber, and the Uber driver drops off my other friends at their houses along the way. So being the person I am, I strike up a conversation for the 30-minute ride. "How are you doing? Are you seeing a lot of high people tonight?" My normal questions. I hate silence, and this is who I am as a person. After we get through some small talk, he starts asking me where I was going, and I explained everything above. Asked me why I'm not partying with my boyfriend at the time, and my dumbass explains, "I'm not sure if we're going to make it with the move, and he doesn't love me anymore." And then he starts to ask me if my mom knows where I am, if people know I'm coming, and when do those friends he just dropped off expect me home? Do I live with them? And thankfully, I caught on that these were weird questions to ask someone traveling alone. So I started lying, saying my mom was expecting me to call her as soon as I arrived, and how I was going to text in the group chat to tell them when I was at the other party safe. Once we arrive, of course, like a horror movie this night was feeling like, the other friend's house was in the woods at the edge of Tampa. And my high ass was in overdrive trying to figure out how I was going to get out of this. We can finally see my friend's house and a little bonfire about 300 feet away when he stops and says this is where he will drop me off. I ran out of that car ASAP and he hightailed it out right as I closed the door. Thank God I didn't leave anything in the Uber. I know it's not the craziest encounter, but my gut is rarely wrong about these things. I didn't think about this again until I saw the news, when they announced that they had caught the guy. I don't know. Hope this was worth being late to work to type out. As I see the drunk woman being carried away by her friend, I sigh to myself, being glad I didn't give her the drink she ordered when she already looked tipsy. What the hell is an angel shot anyway? Chase Through the Woods by a Man by Height Physical. This occurred around 1999/2000. My best friend and I were avid outdoor adventurers and amateur pot growers. We would frequently find secluded places in the woods that allowed us ample light and shade for plants to grow, and that would not allow them to be easily found. One particular day, we went to an annex of trails located near NJ State Park Trail System. The trails weren't in the park, but I had hiked them before and knew they weren't that frequented. We went out that day with our seeds partially sprouted in the moist paper towels. We parked the car at the trailhead and started hiking in. We covered a mile or so and then ventured off the trail and into the woods. We found a clearing, planted the seeds, and tied a few barely visible ribbons off to mark the way to the plant spot to check them in the future. My friend and I got back on the trail and started walking back to the car, when my friend noticed a man in the other direction just staring at us. He was probably in his 30s or 40s, bald head, normal clothes. We didn't think anything of it for the most part, but we definitely kept looking back as anyone would when someone's behind them in the woods. We saw that he was walking 60 plus or so feet behind us. It seemed weird, but it was probably more so due to us having anxiety that we planted seeds. We picked up the pace, but the man also picked up the pace. We weren't gaining any distance. At one point, we decided to get off the trail and let him pass. We turned off the trail and walked into the thickest of sticker bushes, which I remember vividly getting shredded on. We got deeper into the woods and heard cursing. When we turned around, the man was coming through where we entered. It was at that moment we actually became scared. Mind you, we were two young, strong 19-year-olds, but a man following you into the woods is damn creepy. We kind of made a U-maneuver to outflank him and come out to the woods further down the trail. Once on the trail, we ran. As we were running, there was a fork in the trail and my friend went right and I went left. I realized my mistake as my buddy was going down the correct path and I wasn't. So I turned around and started running back towards the fork to follow my friend. As I was running towards the direction we came from to get to the fork, I could see the man running towards me down the trail. He was a distance away, but not far enough in my eyes. Survival mode kicked in and I ran as hard as I could. I caught up to my friend who was walking at this point. I screamed, "He's after us!" And we both booked it all the way to the car. We got in the car shaking and out of breath. We backed up and started to get out of the parking lot when the man appeared at the trailhead. He stopped there and just stared at us as we drove away. I always wonder what that was all about. Did he want to kill a couple 19-year-olds? Was he also doing something illegal in those woods and wanted us gone? My buddy and I still laugh and talk about it to this day, 22 years later. As they knew the cow was soon to give birth, they called upon the local vet to help with any potential problems. Nearly shoulder deep inside the animal, the vet tried to find the legs of the calf, only to grab hold of a human hand. Tried to Follow Me Home by A. Dubutchery. Last night I went to the auto parts store because my car decided to stop working. Thank God it was my weekend. I saw the price of the part and had to come back to get Aftergain the funds. Went back and picked up the part I needed. It was around 9:30 p.m., so it was dark out. I was paying for my things and an employee from the store, had a company shirt on, was saying bye to the cashier helping me. The cashier said, "Thanks for coming by," and the guy left. After some small talk with the cashier, I paid for my part and dipped out. Headed to my car parked right outside the door, and the other employee said something I can't recall. He asked for my name, gave a shortened version. I looked at his name tag, said his name, and shook his hand because he was going in for the shake. He said I was really cute and told him I appreciated that, and we got in our cars. Parked right next to each other, with a spot in between. He started backing out while I looked behind me before doing the same. Looked to the right, clear, then to the left and saw a dude looking over his shoulder, breaking his neck, staring at me. I was surprised and uncomfortable, so I snapped my head back and acted like I went to look at my right shoulder again. He pulled out the lot without, I pulled out and was behind him. He didn't put his blinker on to turn, but when he pulled to the main road, he put his hazards on and stopped at the right side of the road. I thought, is this MF going to follow me right now? Took note of what his car looked like, color, type of car, distinct stickers on the bumper, just in case. I pulled out, passed him, checked my rearview mirror, and he was still there with his hazards. So I was like, nah, just being paranoid. Then he started driving. He was quite a ways behind me, but eventually came up closer. Still didn't think too much. He drove past me on the passenger side, 2 lanes, and I kept my eyes forward because I'm not looking at this dude after that weird shit he did in the lot. Thankfully, this was right before a light where the 2 lanes merged into one and he passed me and got in front. I was still behind him, but for safety purposes I turned right at the next light so to go on a different road in an opposite direction of my home. Didn't want someone to know the general location of my house because I'm outside all the time. Mind you, the auto parts store is like 7 minutes from my house. As I make the right, this dude puts his emergency lights on again and pulls to the side of the road. There wasn't a parking lot for him to turn and follow me, thank God. But I kept driving, checking my rear view, seeing if he'd pop up, and thank God he didn't. I was afraid he would see me driving across the main road to get to my house because we started on the main road, but thankfully not. Been keeping an eye out for his car and him since then, since I live so close to the store. Told my boyfriend about it and described the car just in case. Hopefully I don't see this guy around. Thankfully, I was using a family member's car who lives about 15 minutes away, so he doesn't know what my personal car looks like. The shopkeeper nodded and dialed the phone, as a blood-stained girl frantically explained how she had escaped from her pursuers, injuring herself in the process. As he slid her a can of soda and motioned for her to take a seat at the side of the store, he whispered quietly into the phone, "She's here. Thinks I'm calling the police." Followed by a creep all night. By just a name, yeah? Hey, I feel weird as this is my second post in the sub. Not sure why, but that's whatever. Okay, so I, 26 male, have been kinda seeing this girl from work, 27 female, on and off for maybe a little over a month. It's still kinda early and we haven't defined anything about our relationship, but we do go out, or at least communicate in person a few times a week. We're in different apartments, so I don't get to see her as much as I like. So when I do get the chance to be alone with her, I like to seize the opportunity. So we went to a local festival and met up with some friends. All was fine at the beginning of the night. Then, when I went to get her something to drink from one of the vendors, I took notice she was talking to a guy. I'm not so insecure that this bugged me, but I did walk over to her and make my presence known. She introduced me to the guy whom she just met, and he didn't even acknowledge my existence. He just looked at her and said it was nice to meet her and then walked away, basically shunning me with his eyes. After she got tired of the festival, she asked me to take her to get something to eat. We went over to the bar and grill type establishment, where we met up with another couple we work with. Lo and behold, as soon as we get our drinks, the same guy walks in. He sits at the bar, in a seat that was really close to her. She was also able to confirm that it was the same guy. Now I feel bad about this because the two that we met up with made a few jokes at his expense, but it seemed to be based more in nerves rather than trying to humiliate the guy. We made one final stop for the night after eating, and that was to get female hygiene products for her. As we were shopping at the pharmacy, the same exact guy walks in, but this time he gives me a very malicious smile. Dude gave me total serial killer vibes. As she's looking for her tampons, I'm like an owl over looking at a magazine. He just came up right behind me and stared. I tried to keep my cool and play it off as best I could. When he started to make me sufficiently uncomfortable, I started making my way over to her. After she checks out, we both leave and he decides that he's done shopping as well. I knew at this point that this guy was following us. 3 times isn't a coincidence. She had made mention that he was following behind us. I held her wrist and guided her over to my vehicle. As I unlock the car, he approaches her and says, "Excuse me, but is this jerk bothering you?" I couldn't believe what I actually just heard. She assured him that she was in no danger. I hate having to say this, but I figured this guy wouldn't take a hint without being direct. I told him to leave her alone and to go away. He once again made no eye contact with me and just looked at her. He looked at her almost like trying to look into her soul and said, "Why don't you leave this loser and come with me?" He grabbed her by the wrist and pulled her closer to him. She pulled back, but he didn't let up. I stepped between them and shoved him backwards. He bit his bottom lip like he was so enraged in such an instant. He lunged at me, but I caught him before he made contact and knocked him to the ground. He reached into his pocket, which is where I stopped playing around entirely and kicked the crap out of him with one kick while he was on the ground. I got her in the car and we drove the hell out of there. I drove her to my house where she stayed with me for the night. I didn't want to drive her to her house and risk that creepy individual following her there. I felt better with her at my place. She mentioned wanting to file a police report, though neither of us have done that yet. She is okay. She is shaken up, but she seems to be holding up fine. I like to think this guy had no malicious intent. I like to think that he actually was looking out for her safety, and maybe he was reaching into his pocket for his cell phone or something. I'm not an idiot, though. This guy seemed to have some serious problems. And for the record, I don't in any way condone violence of any kind, but I think in this case it was justified. When it comes to protecting someone like her, I'm not taking a chance. Anyways, that's what's happened. Still not sure what to make of it entirely. And I'd be lying if I said this incident and this guy hadn't been on my mind. Water dripped onto my face from the fountain of youth above, slowly but steadily rejuvenating me with energy and life. But as the tight walls of the cave kept my body from moving even an inch, I only wish for death that will never come. Public Transit Disaster by Anime is Waifu 312. Hello everyone. I wanted to share my scary encounter that occurred just yesterday on the bus. Features leering and verbal harassment. So for a bit of context, I'm a college student. Without giving too many details, I'm a woman on the smaller size of average female height. I currently do not have a car, so I use a bike, walking, and a bus to get around. My college has a transit service that allows you to scan in with the student boarding pass for free. Other non-students are allowed to ride the bus by paying upon entering or purchasing a ticket beforehand. I frequently ride the bus for various reasons, grocery runs, or treating myself to food. And yesterday I had the idea of treating myself to a movie after all the exams I have been having lately. I'm an avid horror fan and knew that Terrified 2 was in theaters, so of course I wanted to see it immediately. One of my friends told me they found it funny and really enjoyed it, which is more than enough reason to go see it. Side note, it was good and hilarious, but if gore is not your thing, I do not recommend it. I was looking at tickets the day before yesterday and trying to decide which time slot I wanted to see the movie in. Looking back now, something in my gut told me to choose the earlier time. I wish I had listened. Another detail I want to add is that there are two bus sizes, a large one and a small one. The bus I rode during the incident was the smaller one. The stop where I got on the bus is the beginning of the route. Unlike every other stop, the driver usually parks the bus here for 5 minutes and gets off to use the restroom, or have a quick break before continuing with the rest of the route. Upon entering the bus, I noticed that only 2 other passengers, another girl about my age, and an older man. The girl was in the front of the bus on the right side, and the man was in the second row on the left side. I sat on the right side several rows back. I usually read something on my phone or listen to music on the bus, so I immediately got on my phone when I sat down. Everything was okay for a little bit until I looked up and noticed the man repeatedly staring at me and looking away before staring at me again. I was immediately apprehensive, but just brushed it off. He started speaking aloud out of nowhere, saying things like, "Beautiful baby," and "so damn fine." While staring at me, I was frozen out of fear and could only keep looking at my phone and trying to ignore it. This continued until I worked up the courage to say, "Sir, would you please stop staring at me?" To which he claimed he was not staring and told me I was extremely beautiful. Unsure what to say, I just stupidly thanked him and went back to my phone. He had his body slightly turned, but when I confronted him, he faced fully forward. The driver got back on and we started moving again, so everything was calm for a bit, though I was admittedly still shaken up. This calm did not last long. Obviously, this creep couldn't contain himself and just had to voice his opinions about me out loud. He started saying similar things again, but also added some new phrases such as, "Gonna make you my wife," and by far the worst one, "I'm gonna get you pregnant." I was shaking at this point and was unsure what to do. I desperately wanted to sit next to the other girl, but did not want to pass him to sit by her. We made it to 2 more stops before the girl got off and said sorry before leaving. My heart dropped to my stomach. The last thing I wanted was to be alone with this guy. Luckily, more people got on at this stop. A middle-aged couple and a guy about my age. In a panicked voice, I sort of shouted and asked that guy my age if he would like to sit with me. He was a bit confused but came to sit by me, and I immediately felt relief. The stress of the situation got to me, and I broke down crying. I guess the creep took this as an indication to leave because he swiftly made his exit after that. The kind younger guy who sat down next to me and began to comfort me. I am so grateful he chose to ride the bus that day. The bus driver noticed the commotion and called me to the front to get information in order to make a report. He told me he couldn't hear anything, but the buses have video and would hopefully pick up what the creep was saying. He told me the same man had recently been kicked off for a similar incident and that he would be reporting this immediately. For the rest of the ride, the young guy and I talked about things like majors and other school-related stuff. I wanted to go into marine biology field, and he's a graduate student from mechanical engineering. I made it to the movies, it was awesome, and back home safely. But I definitely learned a lesson. My boyfriend is going to help me look into some self-defense items, and he taught me a few fighting techniques. I'm still shaken just writing this. I'm actually really afraid to leave my room right now. Sometimes it's easy to forget that creepy encounters with weirdos can happen at any time. They aren't just stories on the internet. I can't believe how amazing the view from the top of the mountain was. I had such intense goosebumps that even my hair on my head was standing on end. The Childhood Cave by Anonymous. This story takes place back when I was a teenager. Back then, I lived with my parents in the part of South Dakota that had a lot of wilderness, and I was one always to take advantage of the woods in the area. I was always about hanging out onto the trail in the woods to see what I could find out there, and I loved to spend my weekends hiking and finding new areas. We lived near a small pond that was right by the small section of the woods that is by a cave system. I spent way too many hours of my teenage years in that cave system, and I honestly loved to spend my entire days out in the wild, just taking the sights and sounds. That said, nothing is perfect, and there were a few close calls that I had when I was young and thought I was invincible. I once fell from a pretty high ledge when I was 13 and broke my arm. And thankfully, that was all I broke, because I could have died. No, that's not the scary story, just a point of note that tells you who I am as a person. A risk taker, an idiot, essentially. I used to go out and do pretty much whatever to whenever, and then head home and do it all again the next day. Like I said, nothing is perfect. And I can recall 2 specific stories that made me feel like maybe spending all of my time out in the wilderness where no one knew where I was, maybe that wasn't such a great idea in the end. The first incident happened during one summer where there was a good amount of foot traffic in the area. Some years there would be more tourism than others. We weren't really a tourism city, but some people there were nature buffs and would stop in the area for the scenery. Like I said, this year was when we would have more people in the area. On this day in particular, I wanted to go down to the pond just to watch the animals down the way. I did as I always did. I got up, got dressed, and ate, then headed out and hit the path as early as I could. One thing to note, I had gone this exact same route the day before, and nothing was out of place. About a quarter of the mile into the path, I ran into the body of an animal that may be gross to most people, but living in nature kind of desensitizes you to animal death. There are so many predators out there, bears, wolves, etc., that you kind of just accept when you see a carcass, and you put yourself in a bit of a defensive mentally in that there may be a predator nearby. Now, this kill was fairly fresh, so that as well puts you in a position where you watch your surroundings even more. The main thing I found to be odd about the carcass was that its head was missing. Again, a bit strange, but nothing too crazy. Animals do weird things. I continue down the way and make my way towards the pond when I see something that legitimately makes me sick to my stomach. Down by the water, I see what looks like a shovel or a spade or whatever, stuck in the ground near the water's edge. And on the end of the stick that points up is the head of an animal. I'm assuming it's the head of the one that I found down on the trail, as it's a deer and it also looks rather fresh. This alone was not enough to scare the hell out of me. As I got closer, I saw that there was a pile of Polaroids scattered around the ground near where the shovel was. I hesitantly stepped forward to look at the pictures, and they were just as sick as you might think. The pictures were basically each a part of the timeline of how the people that killed the deer did so, and then beheaded it. There were about 15 pictures total, and they were each taken at different points. There were 2 people, but they were wearing masks and dark clothing. Like I said, this path was clear this afternoon prior, which meant that whoever did this did so in the middle of the night. I'm pretty sure they were doing it to be edgy, but it was absolutely disgusting. I ended up heading home and calling the police. They came and took the evidence, which was pretty much the pictures and the shovel, and they had the park service come out to clean up the scene. I'm pretty sure they never actually caught anyone, which lends more to the possibility of it being a tourist that did it. The other story I have is one that's less straightforward and is more on the probability side. Like I said, there was a cave that was down by the pond, and it was a fairly large cave. I spent many days of my summers checking it out, and I'm certain I never found every vein that it actually had. Mostly because I didn't really try. And this situation proved that was the right way to do things. On this particular day, a friend of mine and I had decided that we would go through a part of the cave that I hadn't yet explored. This was an idea that he'd had that I honestly wished he hadn't. We got in the cave and we started to explore. Pretty much nothing was out of place until we got back into the far left and into a vein that we've never traveled. Back in the rear vein, there was a small pocket that was pretty much looked like the size of a small room. Inside this pocket, there was what looked like a makeshift bed made of sleeping bags and some clothing. There were posters that were basically taped to the wall of the cave in a sloppy manner. There were a handful of books that were scattered around. Well, this was creepy. The part that made it worse was that there was also a lantern lying on the ground that was still lit, which told me that whoever was staying in the cave wasn't too far away. Now, you may think, that's not that bad. It's just a homeless person making the most of what was available. The problem in this lies with the fact that we lived near a federal prison, and there had been escaped inmates in the past. And around this time we found this, there was an inmate that had gone through the fence and hadn't yet been found. Odds are, what we found was the camp where an escaped inmate was hiding out. Of course, at the time, as a kid, I didn't realize this. We just bolted out of the cave and laughed about it. And we never went back to that cave, or at least never that deep into it. I don't live in South Dakota anymore. But if I did, I can promise you that I'd probably still be out there every weekend. Just like back then.
Was It Just a Dream by Anonymous. Back when I was 19, I had a dream that firmly planted the idea in my head that we are actually living in a shoddily designed simulation. I remember that this happened on my 19th birthday. Actually, well, the first part did. The second part was about a month or so later. On the night of my 19th birthday, I had the weirdest dream I have ever had. It was probably the most realistic dream that I've ever experienced, to the point where it felt like I was honestly lucid dreaming, though this was a long time before I even knew what that meant. In this dream, I remember walking down the street, and I recall that my mind was set on going to the grocery store to get a bag of coffee, something that's not really me. I'm not huge on coffee, honestly. Anyways, I was walking with my earphones in, and a song I really liked came on. I turned my phone up because I was really feeling it, and I remember that I couldn't hear anything around me. I got to the corner where I had to cross to get to the store, and I remember I was standing there, waiting for the light to change. I remember that I wasn't the only one waiting for the light to change. There was also another guy standing there with me. For some reason, what he was wearing stood out to me vividly in the dream. It was a sweatshirt that was orange. It looked like it was covered in paint stains, and I recalled that the logo on the top right said something like Cooper Interiors. After a few minutes, it swapped over to the walk sign, and I started into the crosswalk. I stepped into the road with a bit of haste. I remember that I was just really focused on the beat of the song. Then, after a few steps, I remember seeing a car coming at me at a ridiculously high speed. Something about that moment felt like it was in slow motion. I remember looking at the car, at the driver, as he barreled in my direction. I remember looking to my left and seeing the guy in the orange sweatshirt looking at me with terror on his face. I remember seeing the police officers in their cars behind the first driver. It was like I was being given several moments extra to take in the entire scene around me and take in the details. Saturday, around noon, guy in the orange interior design sweatshirt, the specific song, and me standing in the middle of the crosswalk on the street next to the grocery store. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the ground and feeling cold throughout my body, staring up at a slightly overcast sky. I remember feeling dizzy and not being able to move. Then, I recall the guy in the orange sweatshirt running over to me and the sound of sirens near me. Then, I woke up covered in sweat and freaking out mentally. The dream legit felt like it had happened in real life, almost to the point where I want to believe that I actually died and essentially loaded a save file or something like that. Anyways, on to the really freaky part. A couple months after I had this dream, I was at home and talking with my girlfriend on the phone, and she mentioned that she had just bought some sort of pumpkin spice coffee and that she really liked it. She was saying that it was the best coffee that she had ever had. and that I needed to try it. I relented and told her that I would go sometime and get some. She told me that I needed to go now and get it, otherwise I never would. She knew I didn't really like coffee, and honestly, she was right. I sighed and said fine, then told her I would call her back when I got home. I threw on my jacket and put in my headphones, ready to walk to the store. You probably know where this is going. I was walking down the street with my mind dead set on getting this dumb pumpkin spice coffee to make my girlfriend happy. I knew I was most likely not going to like it, but it was for her, so I needed to do it. Near the corner where I would need to cross, one of my favorite songs came on, and something about it felt different, like I was really feeling it. It felt like I hadn't listened to it for years, and it just randomly came on. I reached for the volume button to turn it up, but paused. It was at this moment that the dream came back to me. The song was the same, the street was the same, the plan was the same. There was only one thing that was out of place: the guy on the corner. There was still a guy standing there. He was still wearing a paint-stained sweatshirt, and it still said Cooper Interiors, but it wasn't orange. It was a really pale blue. I was just standing there and staring at the light, waiting for it to change, and thinking about how that dream went. I pulled my earphones out for a moment and just kind of stood there. Within seconds, I heard police sirens heading in that direction quickly. The light changed over to walk, and at that moment, I felt strange. I got that cold feeling all over again that I had in the dream, almost like it was reminding me what would happen if I did walk. I just stood there and waited for a few seconds, waiting for the car to zoom down the road at full speed. Sure enough, it did. That car, with that driver, being followed by that exact police officer. All of them blasted through the light and passed both myself and the guy in the sweatshirt. After they passed, the guy next to me chuckled and looked over at me. He said something like, "Dang, good thing you took your headphones out when you did, huh?" I actually laughed and nodded, kind of in awe that this whole situation played out in front of me. That's pretty much it. I dreamed the situation and it almost played out in front of me. Part of me thinks that it was either a prophetic dream where I was given a heads up, or it was another timeline with a perfect storm set up. The only difference in this situation was the color of the sweatshirt, and maybe that was the only thing that needed to be different for this all to unfold in a new way. Also, if anyone wants to know, I didn't like the coffee and ended up giving the rest to my girlfriend.
My Paranormal Story by Anonymous. I want to preface this story by telling you all that I have personally never been much of a believer in the paranormal, and I am certainly not the type of person that will immediately say that every strange thing that happens is paranormal or some unnatural phenomenon. My fiancé, on the other hand, he's pretty much the exact opposite. He's a huge fan of ghost stories and is somewhat obsessed with hauntings and all that crazy stuff. And he is fully convinced that all of this was paranormal. Now, while what happened was crazy, I still hold some skepticism, but I am more of a believer. I believe it all started back when I was 9. I think I was going on 10 at the time. I am in my mid-20s now, but this place has been completely burned into my memory. And I honestly feel like I remember every single second I spent in that house. When my father passed away that year, my mother was unable to keep the house we lived in, and she worked with a bank and a real estate agent, or something to sell the house and basically break even with it. From there, my mother, my little sister, and I all moved into a house that my uncle owned and normally rented out. Thankfully, he was willing to let us live there for as long as we wanted, and we would pay him a discount rent as a sort of family favor. The house that we moved into was a nice one. It was a 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, and the original structure was built in the really early 1900s. It had been mostly modernized, but there were still a lot of elements with the house that were obviously old and made way back when. The house didn't have any central air system or heating, so we had to rely on windows and room units, which meant that during the summers we would all sleep in the living room. The house is set up with 3 bedrooms and a bathroom upstairs, and then the living room, a small day room, and a kitchen with a small bathroom on the main floor. And it also had a basement that wasn't finished, so it was a bit creepy just in its existence. The first couple months living in the house were actually really nice. It was comfortable, it was larger than our old home, and Mom seemed like she was happy there. As a kid, I knew that she was hurting after my dad passed, but I'm not sure it really hit me that he was gone for good and that my mom was likely struggling mentally. But again, it seemed like moving into the new home was going to be a good foundation for our future. Now, like I said, there was no central cooling, and we had to have room units, with the exception of 2 rooms. No matter how hot it got outside, the day room and the basement were always ice cold, and the air was always seemingly heavy in those rooms, almost like it was hard to breathe when you were in them. When I had to go into the day room, I always had this weird mentality of, I need to get out of this room as quickly as possible. But the basement was a beast of a completely different kind. Anytime I had to go down there, I would immediately feel like I was going to start crying. I could feel like I was hyperventilating. Every step into that room was one too many. Every second felt like it was draining the life out of me. I think the first event in the basement that made me hate it happened within the first few months of us living there. I was trying to help my mom out with some of the chores and went down into the basement to help out with the laundry. I was loading the clothes into the washing machine and getting everything sorted, and I started feeling like I was being watched. It was weird. There weren't any windows, and it was just us at home, and they were both upstairs, so I knew it wasn't them. Being young, I kind of glanced around and went to see if there was someone down there, but obviously there wasn't. I tried to shrug it off and went back to the laundry, but I just could not shake that there was someone there. I finished loading the clothes in and went to go back upstairs, but as soon as I started walking towards the stairs, I felt something grab my ankle, and I fell straight on my face. There was a moment of confusion, thinking I tripped over something, but there was nothing there or anywhere around me that I could have tripped over like that. Like I said, I don't much believe in the paranormal and never really did, but this freaked me out more than I'm willing to admit. It wasn't long after this happened that my sister would complain to my mom about having nightmares. She would complain about bad dreams where a man would come out of the basement and would kidnap her. She described him as inhumanly tall, saying that his head hit the ceiling, and that he would crouch down into the bedroom while she slept and rip her from her bed. Obviously, these were just dreams. but it was still really weird that they pretty much happened the same day something grabbed me in the basement. More than that, she had this nightmare every night until we eventually moved out of that house. As soon as we finally got out of that house, I no longer had issues with basements, and she stopped dreaming of the Shadow Man. Eventually, when we got older, my mom did tell us that she experienced things in the house, just that she never felt comfortable telling us when we were younger. I know this isn't the most eventful of stories, but honestly, that house was always creepy to me as a kid. The basement thing was just the icing on the cake. Like I mentioned before, I'm not huge into the paranormal, and I never had anything like this happen after we got out of there. The Abandoned Place by Anonymous. 4 years ago, I was a sophomore in high school. I hadn't yet got my license, and this was right around the time I started to partake. Me and one of my friends in the neighborhood, let's call him Kurt, knew of a creek around 1.5 miles from my house, which would be a nice smoking spot. But it was a bit of a hike to get there. It was well known that there was a few scattered structures in the woods here, such as a concrete hut, an old barrel fire pit, and a platform built into the trees, all within 12 feet of each other. This is about 1/4 mile into the woods and about 1/2 mile from any roads. We had been here during the daytime dozens of times before, usually with more friends. We lived in a nice suburban neighborhood, so it didn't seem dangerous to us. Not to mention, nobody else had been spotted there before. It had become a pretty common smoke spot for kids our age. We all just assumed that it was an old, abandoned, homeless structure. But there were still legends passed around by other high schoolers making claims of something sinister. Hooks for hands, serial murderers, inbreed cannibals, that type of thing. The concrete hut was about a 7 by 7 by 5 feet, and the ground had been dug out of the inside, making the roof even taller. We had found improvised weapons, food cans, trash, etc. when we first discovered it 2 years earlier, but nothing of that nature since. Just beer cans, roaches, and cigarette butts scattered around the fire pit from neighborhood kids. The inside was scribbled with Sharpie, the top was covered with a tarp, and the whole thing smelled like piss, so none of us dared to enter. Like I mentioned before, there's also a lookout platform built into the trees about 50 feet away. An improvised ladder made of branches leading to a 5 by 5 platform about 20 feet off the ground. The wood was clearly water damaged, so I never wanted to actually go up there. Back on track. This particular October evening, Kurt and I left at around 6 p.m., hoping to get there before dark. We had several other smoke spots that were closer to my house, but nothing quite matched the excitement and mystique of the hut. We made our way through the neighborhood, through some backyards, and into a field, and we finally passed through the tree line. Stones laid across the creek allowed us to cross without getting wet. Right around the time we get there, the sun was almost fully set, and no light was coming through the trees. This was the first time either of us had been there at night. We hiked at least 500 feet uphill, and we could just barely see the hut through the darkness. The atmosphere had us both uneasy, and we talked with the quietest whispers possible. We didn't want to approach the structure, so we decided to smoke about 50 feet from the hut, right on the edge of the bluff we just climbed. I decided to shift a few feet over to a more even footing before we started, and I felt my foot snag on a fishing line running around a foot of the ground, tied to a tree next to me. A loud clang was made as the line yanked an empty metal bucket and the metal scrap planted in the ground, almost like a makeshift alarm. We hear someone moving down from the platform in the trees about 20 feet away from us, and drop into the leaves below. We take off down the bluff, sliding our asses and hitting trees. We still hear scuffling and grunting behind us. We get to the bottom and sprint through the creek. I trip on a loose rock below me and fall into the freezing cold water before bolting up and continue to run. About a second later, we hear splashing behind us. At this point, we are clear of the tree line and are in a 1/4 mile of open field. We sprint as fast as we can away. Kurt and I are hurt, out of breath, and the person is clearly catching up. We can hear them right behind us breathing heavily, and their loud footsteps growing closer and closer. We sprint through someone's backyard, and we hear their dog starting to bark. We finally run into the middle of the street, and a car slams on their brakes. Kurt and I screech to a halt to avoid the car. We turn around to see someone standing just outside the floodlights of a nearby house, before they turn around and run away back towards the forest. We apologize to the driver, ditch the weed, and call my sister to come pick us up. We explained to her what happened, begging her not to tell my parents, and we never returned to that creek again. Geez, is it that time of the month? Asked my new boyfriend when I told him I needed to be alone tonight. It made it easier when I woke up the next morning covered in his blood. My hunger sated till the next full moon. My dog might have saved me from a home invasion. By Chrissy 510. A few years back, I was with my aunt and uncle after moving to a new state. They had moved into a new home in a new subdivision. In this area, door-to-door salesmen swarmed new developments and new buildings for water softeners, cleaning supplies, solar panels, generators, and the Kirby vacuum people. They wandered the neighborhood all day knocking on doors, but were usually gone around 5 p.m. This particular evening, I was home alone with my dog, a mutt who is mostly a black lab and an unknown mixture. He was roughly the size and weight of a full-breed Labrador, but he had a stockier build and a long, wiry hair. He was a gentle, sweet baby who was upset if someone spoke harshly to him. I'd never known him to be threatening to anyone. My aunt and uncle were out celebrating their anniversary. This time of year, the days were getting longer, and we'd have full dark by around 8 p.m. It was around 7 p.m. and starting to get dusky when someone rang the doorbell and knocked on the door. The door was one of those with the thick glass oval windows, and I could see the door and who was there from the kitchen. I was going to ignore them, but unfortunately they could see me and continued to knock, so I went to answer the door. My dog followed me, but stood off to the side in the shadows of the dining room. The person at the door was a young man about college age, dressed in a college shirt, tie, and khakis. Looked a bit like a Mormon missionary with style. He was thin and about my height, 5'8" to 5'9". I figured he was a salesman of some sort, but thought it was odd that he was out this late in the day. I thought to open the door a crack, tell him I'm not interested, and then lock the door. I open the door a few inches to speak through it, and he starts to spiel about Kirby vacuum cleaners and he wants to come in and give a demo. 1, it's not my house. 2, I know once they get in, they aren't leaving without selling something, and I have no need for their overpriced vacuums. And I don't have $1,000 plus to spend anyways. I tell him, no thank you, I'm not interested, and begin to close the door when he puts his foot between the door and the door jamb and throws his hands up to stop the door from closing. This is when I think, what the fuck? And I hear a vicious growling behind me to my right and a loud, deep bark as my dog lunges for the door. I grab his collar to keep him from going out the door. The guy's mouth drops open, his eyes get really wide, and he looks like he's ready to pass out or pee himself as he jumps back from the door and backs away saying, I'm sorry, wrong house, and then turns and runs to the end of the driveway where a car with 3 men in it pull up to get him and they speed off, tires squealing. I told my aunt and uncle about it when they got home, and we told a few neighbors so they could keep an eye out for unusual behavior. It's possible they were a team of Kirby salesmen. They do travel in teams of 4 and follow the door knockers in the car with the vacuums. But I was suspicious because it was late in the day for them to be knocking on the doors, and it was a team of 4 men. Usually they have a team of 2 or more women in a group because they are knocking on doors at a time of the day when women are going to be home alone, unlikely to let a salesman in. So, a team of Kirby salesmen working late to meet a quota, or a team of home invaders? I don't know, but Cosmo wasn't going to take a chance. After finally finding my key fob, I pressed and held the remote start button until I heard my car start in the garage. After the sounds of something tearing the car to shreds was nearly deafening, I took a chance to sneak my kids out the back window while it was distracted. He'll Be Out Soon by Manic Master 623. A few years ago, I worked at a pizza chain in my hometown as a deliverer. I was 27 but made damn good money delivering. I worked at a few other places, both local and chains, in the years before, and still work as a dasher on occasion even after this happened. Now I choose to deliver in much safer areas for this reason. I got luckier than I could ever imagine. One night I was working and had a double, 2 deliveries to take. Both were cash orders. I had $12 left in my bank, what deliverers are given to use as change for cash orders, so you don't have a ton of cash on you at all times. The first order went smoothly. The guy gave me $50 for a $35 order, so I was excited about the nice tip. I drove to the second delivery. It was an apartment complex with multiple buildings. I had delivered there before. The sun was about to set, but it was still very light out. The chain I worked at had us drive company cars with logos on them, all white sedans. This is important. I grab the order and go to the door to the apartment building. A young guy comes out, and a much bigger, older guy was outside smoking a cigarette. The big guy went inside as a smaller guy came out. He looked around nervously and asked me how much he owed me. The way he was looking around just made me very nervous. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. I told him the amount and he said that wasn't what he was told on the phone. Something was very wrong. I felt someone else walk out behind me from the door. As the first young guy looked around down the parking lot, craning his neck as if he was looking for someone. I told him the amount again and broke down the order for him, trying to keep calm. Then the first guy held a gun to my right temple. I also felt a poke on my spine. 2 gunmen. I couldn't speak. Words wouldn't form no matter how hard I tried. "Give me your money and keys now," the first guy growled, and I fumbled immediately for the keys. I gave him my bank and hadn't realized the 50 was mixed in. I gave him the keys, trying my best to remain calm. Another guy came up from my left, and he had poofy hair and was around the same age as the first kid. The one behind me, I hadn't seen yet. The big-haired kid grabbed the pizza bag and ran off and hid. The first kid searched the company car. Luckily, I had left my wallet in my personal car. I saw him grab my cell phone. That's when panic began to set in. I had pictures on that phone that I hadn't backed up of my 5-year-old son, who absolutely is my world. Please don't take that. I have pictures of my son who died on there. It's all I have of him, please. I lied. My son is very much alive. The kid behind me spoke softly. Trust me, just listen to him. You'll get it back undamaged. I don't want to be here either. I could tell he had been crying by how his voice sounded. Our car began to pull in and the 3 boys took off on the other end of the complex in a full sprint. Before one behind me ran, he dropped the gun in front of me. Standard issue 9mm silver and black, safety off, looked completely real to me. He picked it back up and ran with the others. The car that pulled in saw me. It was a woman and her kid. Panic set in as I realized they could easily come back and do way worse to me as the sky started to get dark. I collapsed. They had taken my company car keys, $72, the pizza, and my phone. The woman ran up to me and asked me if I was alright. She took me into her apartment in the next building over and locked the door. I was shaking so hard I couldn't even hold her phone to talk to 911 as she set down her kid. Her boyfriend, I assumed, helped me call. I spoke to the operator and told her everything. I'm colorblind and these guys were obviously wearing all dark and white clothes, thank God. I had a full description of 2 of them. The poor woman who helped me was going to be late for work, but she still stayed until I was off the phone and the cops had showed up. Man, she was harsh and blunt with the operator, but I'll never forget the woman's utter kindness to me and her boyfriends. Cops showed up and contacted my store, and my manager brought out the spare keys for me to drive the car back to the store. After dealing with the cops, I drove back and was greeted by crying and beyond worried coworkers. All of them were terrified that I was hurt. It meant a lot to me how much they cared, but I told them I was fine. I filed the proper paperwork, and the 72 was written off as a loss for the store. Thank God, because I worked at other stores that make you pay back the money out of pocket if you get robbed to prevent drivers from stealing. I was told by the owner to take the rest of the night off and take care of myself. He gave me a hug. He was, to this day, one of the best bosses I've ever had. What I didn't know was I was in for a long night. I called my best friend before I left the store from the store phone and asked him where he was. We usually meet up for drinks after work. He was around the corner at a bar, so I met up with him. His dad was a District 4 cop in the city at the time, the same district that this happened in. He told me his dad had given him the heads up and he had 2 shots waiting for me to calm my nerves. After the 2 shots, we began playing pool when his dad called his phone and asked if I was with him. He said yeah and handed me the phone. His dad asked if I could come to the station. I was honest and told him I had 2 shots. So he sent out a squad car to get me since it wasn't that far. We get to the station, they had suspects in custody. I need to ID them. 3 boys and a driver. They'd been caught less than 20 minutes after the robbery, speeding. The bulletin had already gone out and matched the description. They had used the money to buy weed and gas and had taken off. They had at least 15 stolen phones on them. The order had been placed on a stolen phone. My phone was in the mix in the box. The police told me to grab my phone only, and I did. They asked me to unlock it. It had fingerprint verification, so that was easy. 9 out of the 10 tries to unlock it had already been used before my phone would have completely reset. It unlocked. I told the police every detail yet again, although my parental instincts kicked in. I told him the guy behind me quite obviously was bullied into this and to show mercy. He was the one with the white shirt. The police went wide-eyed and told me that he was the one talking. The other 3 denied involvement. That's when I found out about the 4th guy, the driver. We found out later he was completely unaware of the robbery and was just picking up his friends. He was never charged. The boy that was behind me and the one who grabbed the pizza were 15 and 16 and got 6 months of house arrest. The only reason that one behind me got off easy despite having a gun to my back was because I asked them to go easy on him, that he was a good kid who didn't want to be there, and he was the only one confessing. Makes sense since he had even said the other guy wouldn't have the phone for long. He was planning on going to the cops had they not been caught. But the other guy? The first guy who put the gun to my temple? It was his 18th birthday. He got the book thrown at him. In the courtroom, he made fun of me and was laughing at me. Seeing him made me panic. The judge scolded him for his behavior, and he just grinned and glared at me with a Joker-like grin. All I could see was pure evil. This kid will commit more crimes. I had no doubt he will eventually end someone's life. You can see how cold he was by just looking in his eyes. He's evil incarnate. I grew up in a town full of murderers and abusers. I had never seen this kind of evil in my life, and I never want to see it again. I asked to have my name stricken from the record and asked to remain anonymous in case he ever got out. I'm so glad I did, because today I got a letter from the state. He's being released in February. The court only had my old address, my parents' house, and my mom didn't think the letter was important. I missed the deadline to protest his release for probation. The plea deal was 8 years, it'd only been 4. He's getting out early due to overcrowding. Not good behavior, overcrowding. This coming February, and I'm ready if he finds me. My wife, my parents, everyone I know knows his face and name. If he tries anything, we are all ready. But for his sake, let's not meet. To the woman and her family who helped me, I was a woman then. I'm trans. If you see this or hear this, please know my undying gratitude for you all. It was an inconvenience for you, and yet you still were late to work to help me, and I can't thank you enough. I bought a Christmas present for your daughter, but when I went to the landlord there to find you, you had moved. I didn't want to be a creep and stalk you to your new place, but I'm glad you got out of that bad neighborhood, and I hope you and your beautiful girl are doing well too. I would gladly meet you again to give you a proper thanks you deserve. From the Domino's driver in Southwest Ohio. Update. Thank you all for your kind words. It's really nice to read. A lot of you have reached out and messaging me, and I'm grateful. I'm not always on Reddit, and it may take me a day or two to reply because of my work schedule. But just know that I'm overwhelmed by the amount of support and kindness you've all expressed to me. I'm still also trying to reach victim services in my state, to no avail. The letter I got has a phone number to call. I've called numerous times and I can't even get a person. It's all automated and I keep having to leave voicemails for my agent and I have yet to get any response, so it almost appears as if I have no voice and the state wants him out. I can't even get his hearing date, so I can't stand up and say that this violates his plea deal and that he needs to stay in or others could get hurt. I hope he doesn't, but I have a gut feeling that he will repeat. My family and I have stayed as anonymous as we can and are working with the courts to have protection when he gets out, in case of retaliation. But we all know they can only go so far, even though his listed address is less than 2 miles as the crow flies from my parents' house. The letter stated I had a month to respond. That month is up in 2 days. I've been responding. Nothing. I plan to keep this as up to date as best as my ability. Thanks again for all the support. It really does mean more than you know. Also, the 2 involved who got 6 months of house arrest have not repeated any offenses. So safe to say they turned around. So that this guy was the only one getting them in trouble. Update. Sorry I haven't been on much. We sadly lost my uncle to his cancer battle, and I found out I have to have surgery. I have a growth on my mandible. Yay, have to get my teeth pulled for them to cut it out. But I'll live. So it's been rough for me to update this. His hearing has already happened. He is to be released in February. He will remain on probation and supervised for the next 4 years. He will also be wearing an ankle monitor for at least a year. Probably 2, depending on device availability. Sad thing is, the day of the hearing I got a call right after notifying me from victim services. Funny, cause I tried to call them for over a month and couldn't get a single reply. Couldn't get a date for the hearing so I could protest. Nothing. But they can call me after the fact. I will continue to update once he is released. My family lives less than 2 miles as the crow flies from the address he was released to. So hopefully, versus keeping my family and address out of the records, fingers crossed. And yes, they have communicated with local police, and so have I. Getting a restraining order might have to happen. Thank God my parents' local police are very good and vigilant. I live out of the country now, though. He won't be able to find me at all. But I will be keeping an eye on him to the extent that I legally can, just in case. Because I'll be in a ton of pain and in recovery for most of the holiday into the next year, a ton of you have reached out to be able to read my story. I'll just tell you here. Yes, you can. You have my permission. The point of this is to help people to realize to be aware of their surroundings and trust their gut. If it seems bad, it is. Get out if you can. I wasn't able to leave. I was doing my job. If you want more info for your readings, please reach out. I'll do my best to reply as soon as I can. Normally I just reply to all messages, but in this case, I hope it's okay that I say this is here. If you do want to read it out on your platform, please do. Just please message me and let me know you did and send me a link to your platform so I can support you. I'll probably be offline for a while, so instead of seemingly ignoring all the messages, I'm not, I promise, just bad end for this year. I'd rather just say it here. And trust me, I will definitely be listening to all the podcasts and videos while I'm hearing. Mods, if this isn't allowed, you can delete this comment, that's fine. Yes, I'm fine. Thank you all so much for your support and kind words. They really do mean a lot. Stay safe out there, and if anything else happens, I'll update you as soon as I can. Happy holidays, everyone. Update. He was released February 2nd, and I've been offline due to surgery, and also a few deaths. My uncle passed away of a long battle with cancer, and so did my friend's husband. So just kinda steer clear of social media for a while. He's out. He has everything public on Facebook, so I'm unable to keep tabs. I know the city pretty well. I'm unable to use the surroundings to figure out where he is in his videos. Not to be creepy, I just want to make sure he's not near my family. Luckily, he's staying on the other side of town away from my family. Local police have been notified to where my parents live since that's my old address. If anything happens, there's a priority call. I stopped proceedings to get a restraining order. Before you all call me crazy, I decided to give this guy a chance. He's already coming out into a much worse world economically. I'd rather not start an RO and prevent him from getting a job. That and I risk autonomy. As to why I was ignored and not properly notified that he was getting released, I have contacted a lawyer friend seeking advice on how to proceed with how the county handled things. As a victim, I have the rights and I plan to exercise them. In the meantime, he seems harmless. One of the videos is his buddy is showing him how to make a Facebook live video and not getting busted for the music in the background. He has a lot to learn. A lot has changed since he got in. Hopefully, for once, the system can work correctly. I hope so. He got his GED while he was in as well. And the videos I've seen are the same guy. I can't forget that face. But yet he seems so different. I get being glad to be out, but I don't see the emptiness in his eyes anymore. Maybe he got the help he needed. Here's hoping. No one should ever go through what I went through, physically and mentally. See him out and gain a grasp on life is actually more calming than I thought. Who knows? Maybe he's changed for the better. If anything else happens, I'll update again. Hopefully, this is my last update. Thanks again. A quick little extra from me and the writer. 1. Trust your gut. If it doesn't feel right, get out. And my second rule is, be rude. Don't worry about it. If you don't feel safe, get out. It doesn't matter if you're rude at that time. If you get out safe, nothing else matters. Be safe out there, guys. And seriously, trust your gut. Does anyone know how long it takes to die without food or water? The little girl asked on a question and answer website. It's been 4 months since I locked the cupboard, but every time I knock, he knocks back, she wrote under the description. Uber driver freaks me out by changing routes. By Panadesk Inc. A little context for this one. Just so you know, this ended up being longer than I expected. I, 32 female, live in a country where women get murdered in staggering numbers. About 10 to 11 are killed daily according to statistics. And most of these murders go unpunished. Hell, many don't even get investigated by police. These murders range from domestic abuse to random abductions. For example, several women have been abducted in regular taxis and services like Uber, and then their bodies turned up abandoned with signs of R and SA. As for my story, I usually get around town in my own car, but I've used Uber on multiple occasions. This is not Uber bashing, by the way. Most times it is safe and a reliable service, which is why I use it. And I try not to be paranoid despite the stories of women that have gone missing in this way. Anyway, this means every woman I know has thought about what they would do if they found themselves in this situation. Stuff like being on the phone with someone the whole ride. Not falling asleep no matter how tired/drunk you are. Sharing your location through another app. assessing whether jumping out of a moving car is worth the risk, and even carrying weapons. I carry a pocket knife, and I learned to use it. Survivors had told stories of their drivers going quiet, turning off the app, and changing routes to streets they don't recognize. They try to pass it off as taking a shortcut. That being said, one day after work I had to take a taxi home, and I scheduled an Uber as usual. The car rolled up, the make and model matched, the plates matched, and the driver looked like the photo. So far, so good. I climbed inside the car, greeted the driver, and immediately shared my live location with my hubby, letting him know that I was on my way. As an extra precaution, I always check the locks can be disengaged by hand, and bonus points to the cars with the windows that can be cranked down manually. The drive started normal. Driver was an older guy, friendly. We struck up a conversation, small talk. We found a lot of traffic and the driver asked if I wanted to take an alternate route. I pointed at an access road that I normally use to skip traffic, and he switched lanes. We were going down the access road, and that's when things started getting sketchy. He said that he made a wrong turn, and he kept driving further and further away from the main road, supposedly looking for a way to get back on track. The app was still running as normal, and the GPS was telling him how to get back on the main road, but he kept ignoring it, saying that we were now too far away anyway and that he knew another way to get to my destination faster. So this is when alarms started going off in my head, especially because we were getting closer to the bad part of town. True, if you cross those neighborhoods, you can find another main road on the other side. But most people avoid it for it being the aforementioned bad part of town. Like, police don't even patrol these streets sometimes. As he drives deeper into the neighborhood, he notices I'm tensing up. Truth is, I was debating whether I should reach for my knife or if I was being super paranoid, and the driver was honestly just trying to get to the other main road. So he starts telling me about the neighborhood, and that I shouldn't be scared, that it was dangerous, but that good people lived there. Honestly, I wasn't so worried about people living in the neighborhood as I was about this mofo taking the scenic route. So I started talking too, about how I was aware there was a road that crossed the other side, and that I knew exactly where I was. The conversation at some point turned to his daughter, who was college-aged, and I kept making as many parallels as I could between that girl and myself. Hand on my pocket, knife by this point, the other hand ready to unbuckle the seatbelt, while I kept an eye on the map to make sure we were getting closer to the other main road. And thankfully, we were. I did not begin to relax until I started recognizing where we were. We did eventually make it to my own neighborhood, and I made him stop a block before we reached my house. Didn't want the guy to know where I actually lived, and I skipped out of there as fast as I could. I really hope I was just being paranoid, and that I was never actually in any danger. But damn, that was an intense ride. I'm a very paranoid and cautious person, so I decided to time travel to the moment of my death to see if I could prevent it. Who knew that my time traveling would be the cause of my demise? I waved back at a man. Now I think he wants to hurt me. By Kawaja 0192. Every day I walk home from school with my friend because she only lives a little bit away from me, so our routes line up. At the start of the school year, we noticed there was a man usually looking at us from his window while we walked home from school. Found it a little weird, but ultimately didn't think much of it. A few months ago, after the heat of the summer died down a bit, he started sitting on his porch when we walked by. Usually he would just smile at us. Sometimes I smiled back, but I usually just ignored him. One day, as I was walking by his house, he waved to me from where he was sitting. I stopped and waved back at him and told him to have a nice afternoon as I walked past. It felt a little weird because he didn't reply, but eventually I forgot about the whole thing. Once when my mother was at work, I was alone at our house and I noticed him walking past our house several times through my window. I felt very creeped out and uncomfortable. I considered talking to my parents about it, just in case, but I ultimately convinced myself he wasn't doing anything wrong, so it didn't really matter. Yesterday I walked home from school alone because I had to stay behind with some other kids outside the school for a few hours since we had art club that day, and I didn't want to walk home just to have to come back fairly soon after. I had just bought myself a nice pair of wired headphones a few weeks with the money I had been saving up for a long time, since I don't have a job. I was playing them over one ear and I was walking home. On the way home, there's a public lot with a stable on it that I like to cut through to get into the yard as quick as I can rather than walking around the property. Sometimes people like to hang around it to meet up, but there wasn't anyone on it that I could see. As I rounded a corner on the stable, someone grabbed the back of my shirt. From the way they were grabbing it, I could see part of their hand. I jerked forward and they grabbed the top part of my headphone. The wire was at the bottom part of my neck, and I got stuck for a moment, and I remember feeling like if I couldn't get away, something very bad was going to happen. The wire eventually snapped, and I took off running as fast as I could, screaming. They let go of my shirt, and I hopped the half-length fence to our property, and I ran as fast as I could onto the sidewalk in front of my house, because I was worried that I would take too long on the lock if they were following me. By the time I got to the sidewalk point, I was crying, and I felt like I was going to collapse because I was so scared. When I looked over my shoulder, I couldn't see anyone, but I kept running until I reached my friend's house in case whoever was there was still around. When I got there, I was in tears, and it took me a bit to explain the situation because they couldn't understand me. I tried calling my mother, but she wouldn't pick up the phone. My friend's mom called the police and they came to check things out. There was nobody at the stables and they told me that it was most likely some kid trying to mess around, but they escorted me home to where my mother was waiting for me anyways. I didn't tell them about the old man because I was worried they would think I was crazy, considering he hasn't technically done anything, but there's something in my mind that keeps telling me that it was him who grabbed me at the stables. When I was walking home from school today, I brought a screwdriver with me in case I needed to defend myself. I also had my friend with me. My mother offered to pick me up from school, but I was worried that if I showed how the encounter had affected me, then it would make things worse. I also avoided the stables, and my friend made sure I made it to the door. The guy on the porch wasn't there today, and I'm still not fully sure if it was him or not. I feel terrible that my headphones broke, but I can't help but wonder what would have happened if they didn't. I'll update if anything else happens. I'm using a spare account in case any personal details not in this post can be found on my main account. I was sad that one of our young women had left the shelter to go back to her abusive boyfriend. The sadness quickly turned into rage when I met my son's girlfriend. Creepy Neighbor by Top Flen 2224. Hey guys, this is a real story that has absolutely traumatized me and my boyfriend. 2 years ago, I moved to the UK for university, as I always wanted to go there and get away from my parents as the situation at home was beginning to become too toxic for me. In my first year at uni, I moved into student accommodations and met some really great people. It was a good year, even without me and my boyfriend, who I'm still with, and just enjoyed my time away from my family and discovering what independence really meant. Anyhow, as the second year came by, I decided with some friends to move into a house rented by student accommodations. At least we had our own house, and weren't restricted as much with noises and parties as living in a small shared flat like the year before. Note, I had a ground floor room and my window gave into a small backyard, in which I go to smoke every day as I am a smoker, and in which there would be a very thin wooden door giving into the other side of the street, where you put your bins and broken chairs, blah blah blah. The door could be only closed and locked from the inside of the backyard, but since it was an old door, we had attached some strings to keep it closed for good. I had neighbors on each side of the house, so we were surrounded by families and some other student accommodations. The neighbors on the right of us were 5 boys, who looked way over the age of being in university. They were strange, so to say. I met one of them outside our house one day because of a police investigation due to one of his flatmates attacking him and the others with a kitchen knife and burning their kitchen down. I heard some screams, and so I went outside with my flatmates and saw one of them being covered in blood and cuts everywhere on his arm and a wound on his head inflicted by a kitchen knife. Me and my flatmate didn't know what to do, so we offered him our help to clean him up and give him an old t-shirt and change out of those bloody clothes. We then saw the guy who hurt these flatmates being escorted out by the police and into a van and driven off to be arrested. I don't know anything more about that story. The police didn't really tell us anything else. Anyway, the guy who helped us was quite weird. He said a lot of BS and kept trying to grab me and flirt with me. And we noticed when we helped him, he smoked a lot of marijuana, but just didn't really care at the moment, as we just wanted to make sure he was okay, as we didn't know him. Then, after some time had passed, I would go to uni and come back home and see him quite often in the street, and just never said a word to him again. But one day, he came up to me in the street while I went to go to the corner shop and started talking to me weirdly, and I didn't feel comfortable at all with that for some reason, so I just didn't respond to him. He then just said, "Oh, that's okay, I'll just wait for you in front of your house then, and we'll talk further." No need to say, I was creeped out and just thought he was joking. So I bought my drinks at the shop and headed back to my street. And as I turned into the street where my house was, I saw him with his flatmate sitting on my doorstep, waiting for me. So I panicked and went back to the corner shop and called my only guy flatmate to ask him to open the door and tell the guys to go away. But obviously he wasn't home, and no one else was either. So I literally just waited out until they left about an hour later, and then sprinted back to my home and locked the front door. Note, my front door has a glass panel on it where you would be able to kind of make out who was standing in front of it. After this already pretty scary encounter, I just tried to avoid the guy and mostly succeeded for a while. But then one day, as I went to smoke in the backyard, I noticed that the wooden door, which is always closed, was open, and the strings that were put there to keep it closed were cut off. For whatever reason, I didn't think anything of it and just closed the door again and put new strings on it, thinking it was one of my flatmates who took the bins out and just didn't tie it back. The weird neighbors would very often scream and yell and fight in their house, and it would wake me up and my flatmates up in the middle of the night. But we kinda got used to it after a while. But one evening, my boyfriend slept over like he normally did, and he, who usually never, ever wakes up because of a noise, woke up in the middle of the night because of a bang and some whispering. I was sound asleep, so he very silently woke me up, and we both just waited in the dark and listened for any noises. Suddenly, we heard the wooden door just bang, just shoot open, and some footsteps next to my window. I always have my window open because it gets very warm inside. So we both just froze, and then we heard the door leading to the backyard get shaken softly as if they were trying to get inside. And then they stopped. Luckily, we had the curtains closed so they couldn't see us, but we were ready to get dressed and get the F out of that room and lock them in if they came in from the window. Then we just heard my window move and get more open, and one of the guys saying something in a different language that we didn't understand, and started to hear them trying to get in. My boyfriend and I just shot up out of bed, took my phone, put clothes on, and ran out of the room and out of that house. So I then called my flatmates and told them to lock themselves in their rooms, and then I called the police, who luckily came in less than 5 minutes as the headquarters were a couple streets down from us. I don't remember anything after the police came. I think me and my boyfriend were in shock. They ended up catching one guy. The other fled and was later found a few streets up smoking weed. The police told us they went inside their house and found a lot of meth and heroin, and that they were just carrying a massive kitchen knife with them. I was so confused as I've never done anything to offend or do anything wrong to my neighbors. So the idea of them breaking in with God knows what intentions with a kitchen knife terrorized me and my boyfriend. The two guys ended up being arrested, and one of them was put in prison for 2 years for carrying a weapon with the intention to harm. I never heard anything else from the police, and I moved back home a few months later, as I was so scared and it traumatized me for months on end, not knowing what would happen if my boyfriend didn't wake up. I'm still coping with it and finding it really tough to get over it, of always asking myself what if and what would have happened if. I now very often wake up because of the slightest noise and get horrible nightmares because of it. But hey, at least I'm still with my boyfriend, and we often talk about it, and it helps a lot. My wife seemed caught between amusement and embarrassment as I stood from my chair and started to sing to her. But now, everyone in the restaurant has been singing the same unearthly note for 15 minutes, and her eyes show nothing but terror. Hacked and Stalked by Demi Green Fell Zero. Hey guys, I need advice. I know this is not usually what people post here, but I don't know where else to post. But for about 3 months, I have been experiencing hacking for what I assume to be another tenant in my building. It all began with hacking my Bluetooth speaker. I'd be listening to something while doing my housework, and the next thing I know, my device would be disconnected, and the hacker would start playing very creepy and inappropriate music via my speaker. The main song they would play is Fucked with an Anchor by Elle Storm, a song I never heard until this. If you choose to listen to the song, you will see why this is immediately freaking me out. I would try everything I could to turn it off, but they would put the volume at full and play again and again. This happened on 2 separate occasions. After this, I stopped using my Bluetooth speaker to prevent this from happening again, until they hacked into my PlayStation and began playing the same song, again on full volume, and continued to play after I tried to press the pause or exit my music app. I then unplugged my PlayStation and have not used it again. Finally, yesterday I asked Google a question via my Google Nest device, and straight after I heard a ding on the device, signaling that someone else was controlling it, which is only possible if I grant access. Also the case with all the other devices they have hacked so far. Straight after the ding, the hackers started playing the creepy music again, different from last time. It was an old song with a very creepy undertone, and the only words I remembered are, "Times are getting hard, boy." I straight away unplugged my device to stop the music and have stopped using the device altogether. The reason this has freaked me out more than the last few times is the fact that I was on the phone with my friend at the time, talking about some personal things I had going on. Therefore, I believe the hacker is able to hear me. I'm unsure whether this is due to them being a direct neighbor of mine, or whether they have hacked my device to listen to me. I'm completely stumped what to do now, as I've contacted my landlord and they said that they'll send out a warning email to all the tenants, but I need to contact my internet provider for further action. I should have mentioned this earlier, but I live in student accommodations, and to make it cheaper, everyone uses the same Wi-Fi, but have separate logins. So the reason it's so easy for them to hack into my device is due to us using the same Wi-Fi. I then contacted my internet provider and they said they can't do anything about it. I don't know what to do anymore. I have now had to forfeit the use of 3 separate devices to ensure this stops happening, but they continue to find a way to hack me. I feel incredibly unsafe and uneasy in my apartment, becoming paranoid someone is listening to me or watching me. I feel as if I'm going crazy. So please give me advice. My boyfriend complimented my makeup, but told me that he wished that I wouldn't wear so much. I gazed at the bruises among my face and wished that he wouldn't have to make me wear so much makeup. My family went to our hometown for my dad's 50th birthday. At a bar, a stranger came up to our table and said our incredibly secret family code. By Maridu. I want to preface this by saying that this is all 100% legitimate. Nothing in this story is made up in the slightest, and it is not exaggerated in any way. My mother was an avid conspiracy podcast listener when my brother and I were growing up. She used to listen to Coast podcast on alien conspiracies and would talk about recent UFO sightings and stuff like that. Anyways, because of this, my mom decided to tell my dad, my brother, and I an incredibly secret one-word code that would only be used to verify that we are who we say we are in case of time travel or something like that. It's a pretty unique word, if you can even call it that is almost inconceivable to be mentioned in regular conversations. We all thought it was pretty corny, but we all agreed to remember it, and all of us talk about the code in conversations every once in a while. Note that my mom came up with this code several years after we moved away to a different state, California, from our hometown, Illinois. Fast forward to last week. A tradition in our family is to go back to our hometown for Thanksgiving every year, and my dad's and uncle's birthday is within the week, so we usually celebrate their birthday during the week as well. We decided, since it was my father's 50th birthday, that we'd go to a dive bar with my family and my parents' high school friends. Vibes were great, and it was the first time our whole family had been out together for several years. About an hour in, a late 60s to early 70s man wearing a bar staff shirt came up to me, my brother, and my mom, and said this incredibly secret aforementioned family code. The way he said it was so deliberate. It was like he knew how much the code meant to my family. We all looked at each other with very perplexing gazes, like we all wanted to say what the fuck to each other, but as soon as we looked at each other, he went over to where he was sitting prior to this incident. My brother went over to talk to him a few minutes later, but I forgot what he said to him. Nothing noteworthy as far as I know. I'll update this post what he said to my brother during the encounter when I ask him. Later that night, he and my dad were outside smoking, and he gave my dad a rock. It was a dark brown rock with some dark orange streaks passing through the rock. I think my dad gave it to my mom, and my mom threw it away. But I'll update this post with an image of it if she still has it. My mom believed that the rock was some sort of bad omen. I shit you not, this really did happen. My brother and I think it's a clever prank that my mom has pulled. But she usually cracks when this happens, and we've asked her a few times. I wouldn't think she would have joked about this in the first place, but it's the only logical thing that we could possibly come up with. Even the day following, my brother and I asked my mom about this incident again, and she remained very adamant about her not having any involvement in this. My dad isn't the prank-pulling kind of guy, and wasn't even there to see it go down. No negative connotations, but it's just not in his nature to ask a stranger to do something like that. So it eliminates him from doing something like this. We asked him anyway, and to no surprise, he said he had no involvement. I know this seems incredibly unbelievable, and I agree, it totally does, but it did happen, and it's a creepy interaction we'll likely never forget. I'm not a believer in the supernatural, but if I did think it was just a prank, I wouldn't have spent this time posting it here. Edit to respond to some of the comments thus far. I wasn't trying to insinuate the mystery guy is a time traveler. I was simply saying that my mom told us this in case of some weird scenario where we wouldn't be able to recognize each other physically. Basically, a way to verify that we are who we say we are. I know I explained it poorly, but all my family lives outside of our hometown today. And, even though I said we go every year for Thanksgiving, we haven't for the last 2 or 3 years due to COVID restrictions. Other than that exception, we've basically been every other year. We haven't lived there for roughly 20 years, and the only family member living there is my grandmother, who is in her 80s, and I don't even think she knows how to get the phone number for said bar. As mentioned previously, some of my parents' high school friends still live here, however. It was an on-the-fly decision to go to the dive bar. We weren't frequents, and it's located in a medium-sized city, greater than 150,000. Nobody had posted its whereabouts on social until later that night or afterwards. I appreciate everyone's responses so far. I agree that the bar getting a tip is definitely not too far-fetched. However, I still think it's quite unlikely. To everyone trying to guess the secret code, nobody's gotten it yet. Concerned that I was sleeping too many hours per night, I set a stopwatch before bed. Nothing could have prepared me for how long I was unconscious. And with that, our time together is coming to an end. First of all, I'd like to thank my Patreons and members for your support. You guys are awesome, and I really appreciate it. If you have a story you'd like me to narrate, there are 3 ways that you can send it, either through my subreddit, my website, or email it. All the links are down below for you guys. And last but never least, I'd like to thank the writers who let me read their stories back when I originally did these. I know this was a good collection of different kinds of stories, and also we had some guest narrators, which their links will also be in the show notes for you guys / description box. As you might be able to hear, my voice isn't 100% back quite yet, which is why I did another compilation. And as I was digging up for this compilation, I realized it was very overdue. We were in 2022, over a year ago. This is just a great way to see how the music's changed, how my narration's changed, even my video editing's changed. I'm always trying to do better and make my skills, well, better, of course. And I also have the links to the original videos if you're interested in watching them in any way. A little interesting side note that I don't know if anyone else is going to notice but me, I had 213 volumes, which means we're actually a lot further into the Reddit story volumes, which I'm not going to change. I just found it very amusing when I realized I had 213s, but that's because I had that weird one where I took stories that I had already done on other channels, and because it wasn't in a spreadsheet that I used to keep track of numbers, I reused 13, not realizing it. I know exactly where it happened. I have reused numbers before, which is why I started using the spreadsheet the way I do, because it helps me a lot, but very amusing for me. I don't know if you guys will find it as amusing as I did. I'm pretty sure I got COVID, and every time I've gotten COVID in the past, it's always gotten to my voice and just destroyed it. So this is not unusual, sadly. And when I went to try to record earlier this week, I realized my voice wasn't quite ready yet, so I decided to do the compilation, but I feel like it's close enough now that if I narrated, yeah, it's going to sound a bit odd, but not as bad as it would if I had done it this week. So next week, I'm going to have new stories for you guys. I also do have some pre-recorded, which does help quite a bit. And now if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and make sure it feels it. If you're new, I would hope you would subscribe and turn that pretty little bell to all notifications. And of course, I would love a comment. Tell me what you liked that I used to do, or what you've kind of seen different, or even what kind of stories you like in the future. I have always absolutely loved comments, guys. If you're on the podcast and are able to, please leave me a review, or if you're on Spotify, there are questions that you can answer as well. And if you'd like to help the channel or the podcast grow, just sharing it with anyone else who might enjoy these stories helps quite a bit. But if you'd like to financially help, I do have a few different ways you can do it. Either Patreon and memberships, but I also have PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, and Super Thanks on YouTube. All this will never be expected, but always appreciated, guys. As I said before, all the links are going to be in the description box / show notes for you guys, making life easier, and if you're on YouTube, they're actually on screen as well for you. But as always, guys, thank you for watching and listening. It's surreal to know that I've been doing this for 4 years, and I know if I didn't ever get an audience, I probably would have stopped narrating. Maybe not stopped reading, but definitely wouldn't still be doing this if I didn't have an amazing audience like you guys, whether you've been here from the start or just new. Thank you guys so much. Sleep tight and don't let 42 bite.